Unova, at night, feels less like a region from a handheld game and more like a slow dream laid over water. Out beyond Castelia City, the harbor lights blink and shimmer on the surface of the bay, stretching into long, trembling lines every time a gentle wave passes underneath, as if the whole skyline is quietly trying not to wake anyone. Far along the coast, near Undella Town, the sea rolls in with a soft, patient rhythm, and the houses on the cliffs glow in pale yellows and blues, like sleepy lanterns watching over the shoreline. Even Nimbasa, usually remembered for its bright amusement park and noisy crowds, becomes something else once the sun goes down. Its Ferris wheel turns in slow, deliberate circles, and the distant glow of the city feels more like a nightlight than a festival. There are rails, rivers, and piers, puddles, and rain-soaked streets. And yet, this is not a story of glory or victory, not a tale of packed stadiums or roaring cheering sections. Tonight, Unova is a place of reflections on wet pavement and quiet bridges over dark canals, a region that seems to exhale as the last trainer logs off for the day. What makes Unova so interesting is that it was the first main region to step away from Japan-inspired landscapes and wander across the ocean, borrowing its shape and spirit from New York City. But here, we won't focus on the rush of traffic or the crush of people. Instead, we'll trace the outlines of boardwalks and docks, listen to the low murmur of Castilia's harbor, and imagine them drifting in the current alongside the soft music of Undella's off-season resort, where the waves feel almost apologetic as they touch the sand. For every bustling metropolis in other games, there is this quieter version of Unova, built from rain, reflection, and the faint echo of distant trains. Tonight's journey will move slowly through some of the best and strangest details from Pokémon Black, White, Black 2, and White 2, but at a pace that never asks you to keep up. Think of it as a whispered tour. Seasonal changes that turn roots from dry to muddy, version differences that make one town a shining black city and another a peaceful white forest. Story threads about truth and ideals that float just beneath the surface of every battle. Some of these facts are powerful turning points in the series, and some are as weak and overlooked as a forgotten box Pokémon, quietly gathering digital dust. Placed together, these small details, background choices, and hidden mechanics form a calm current we can follow through Unova's nights. So settle in, close your eyes if you like, dim the lights, and let each fact wash past you without effort. There is no need to remember which gym evolves into which sequel, or which route changes with the seasons. You can let the information drift by, like a line of lights along Castilia's piers, gently reflected in dark water, while you rest and listen, and maybe slowly fall asleep. And as that line of light stretches out over Castilia's dark water, another, quieter current in Unova starts to come into focus. The slow argument the whole region is having with itself about what is real and what should be. When Black and White are not loud about it, but beneath every route, every battle, every soft little menu click, there's this gentle tug of war between truth and ideals, almost like two voices murmuring under the music while you drift off. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story of a region that can't quite decide what matters most. For every confident gym leader who tells you to chase your dreams, there is a stranger on a bridge, asking if using Pokémon in battle is truly right. For every bright, bustling street in Castelia, there's a quiet corner in Nimbasa or Driftvale where someone is wondering what happens to the weak creature that loses, or the helpless one left in a PC box forever. Placed together, These conversations start to feel like Unova is talking directly to you, very softly, about what you believe in when the room is dark and the game is the only light. Reshiram and Zekrom are the obvious symbols, of course, but what makes Unova so interesting is how they're framed less like weapons and more like bedtime story dragons. One curls around the idea of truth, of what is, of facts and history, and things that can't be denied. The other wraps itself around ideals, the glowing dream of how the world could be if trainers were just a little braver, a little kinder. Imagine them drifting in the current of the night sky above Unova, not roaring, just watching, quietly disagreeing about which matters more as you choose which version to slip into your DS. Even that choice, black or white, is a tiny, sleepy test of values. In one world, Black City rises like a harsh, metallic reminder of power and battle and profit. In the other, White Forest stretches out as a fragile ideal of nature, friendship, and simple living. The routes you walk, the trainers you meet, even which buildings glow on the horizon all become soft questions. Are you more drawn to what is efficient or what feels right? Some of those answers change again in Black 2 and White 2, as if Unova is admitting it doesn't have everything figured out either. Settle in, close your eyes if you like, and think of this video as a slow walk through those truths and ideals hidden in the game's design. The facts we're about to wander through are not just trivia. They're little clues about what Game Freak believed Pokémon could be in this 5th generation. How they quietly challenged the expectation that these games were only about stronger stats, bigger moves, and more power. For every legendary dragon or champion's ace, there is a forgotten mechanic, a background sign, a weak water Pokémon placed in just the right puddle to make you feel something you weren't expecting. And yet, some of the most telling details are tucked so far into Unova's corners that most trainers never really saw them, or never thought to ask why they were there at all. In the next stretch of our journey, we'll start turning over those stones one by one, beginning with a place where the map itself argues with you about what kind of world you're walking through. So when the map finally stops arguing, it does something softer instead. It takes you far away. For every quiet, Japan-shaped region that came before, there is Unova, set not just a few routes down the road, but across an entire ocean, like a dream someone had after staring at a postcard of another country for too long. Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh. Each one was a rearranged piece of Japan. Familiar mountains and coastlines turned into routes where trainers shuffled weak early-game creatures into battle. They felt local, almost domestic, as if you could walk from one to the next if you were patient enough. Unova breaks that line. What makes Unova so interesting is that it is modeled on New York City and the land wrapped around it, a distant place of towers and water and noise, softened into something you can hold in your hands on a tiny screen. Castelia City is where that postcard feeling settles in. Close your eyes for a moment and you can almost hear it breathe. It's Manhattan after the crowds have gone home. Tall buildings rising in quiet rows, their windows glowing like tired eyes. The tops fading into a purple, pixelated night sky. Narrow alleyways slip between those towers. Not dangerous, just lonely. With a single trash can, a stray NPC, a weak little Pokémon animation looping in the corner as if it's too sleepy to do anything else. Down at the harbor, the water barely ripples. Ships rest in place like they've forgotten what real motion feels like. And yet, the whole city hums with a kind of muted power. Step away from Castelia, and the New York echoes keep following you, thinner and softer each time, Sky Arrow Bridge stretches out in a long, gentle curve, a clear echo of the Brooklyn Bridge, but without the honking or the rush, just your footsteps, the distant water, and the slow tilt of the camera, as if the game itself is telling you to look up and breathe. Nimbasa's amusement park glows like a distant Coney Island, its lights bright but strangely harmless, a place where even the rides feel a little weak, more decoration than danger. Driftvale, with its muted cranes and sleepy docks, turns the idea of a bustling port into something half-forgotten, a town that should be loud and industrial, but instead seems to be winding down for the night. Placed together, these cities let Game Freak push harder on contrasts without waking the player up. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a region built on opposites that never quite shout at each other. Urban versus rural, nature versus technology, huge bridges and tiny villages, and between them, long, calm routes where nothing more dramatic happens than a frustrating patch of tall grass or a lone fisherman guarding his weak team. Imagine them drifting in the current of time, too. Black and white, then black too, and white too, each one nudging Unova's shape a little. A forest becomes a city. Sand becomes stone. Lights brighten or dim. We'll come back to those shifts soon, because hidden in those quiet changes is the clearest proof that this faraway region was never meant to stay still. And then, when Unova finally stopped drifting, and you stepped onto its soil, something very quiet, but very strange, had already been decided for you. The region wasn't just far away from Kanto and Johto on a map. It was sealed off in a softer, subtler way by the creatures you were allowed to meet. For the first time in the series, Pokémon Black and White's regional Pokédex was made of only new faces during the main story. A kind of gentle embargo on nostalgia that meant no Pikachu in the early grass, no Gyarados lurking in a dark lake, no familiar safety net of old partners to carry you through every battle. For every comforting Lapras or sturdy Blastoise you might have leaned on before, there was now a Patrat blinking at you, or a Basculin thrashing about, asking to be taken seriously. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of walking into tall grass and realizing you don't recognize a single silhouette. Unova becomes a dream because of that choice. You walk along Route 1, settle in, close your eyes for a moment, and listen. Every cry is a new sound. Every shape that rustles the grass is just a little unsettling, as if the game has quietly retuned its entire ecosystem. The first water type you fish up might be that eternally frowning Basculin. Weak in all the familiar ways and yet oddly important, because on this side of the ocean, there is no Tentacool to complain about, no Goldeen to roll your eyes at. Imagine them drifting in the current, these unfamiliar creatures, bobbing up one by one in ponds and rivers that feel like they belong to a different world. What makes this so interesting is how perfectly it mirrors the story's own themes. You, the player, leave behind the truth you already know about type matchups and favorite partners, and you chase a new ideal instead. Learning Unova as if you were a fresh trainer again, helpless and curious at the same time. Every early battle turns into a small act of research, as you test whether this round blue thing is sturdy or fragile, whether that delicate-looking water type actually has hidden power or is just another frustrating disappointment. For every legendary dragon, arguing about ideals and truth, there is a humble Tympole or Ducklet quietly teaching you what this new land really values. And yet, this blank canvas is kindest to the weakest, most overlooked Unova Pokemon. When there is no Gyarados to overshadow them, even something as forgettable as a basculin or a panpour, has a brief, shimmering moment where it is all anyone has, a fragile importance that might never return once the national dex opens and the old giants swim back in. Placed together, these small, uncertain encounters make you notice tiny details and hidden mechanics in a way you might have ignored before. And in the next sections, we'll start peeling back those layers, those quiet systems and secrets that only reveal themselves when the world around them has been wiped clean. When the old giants are gone and the roots feel strangely empty, Unova does something very gentle to keep the world from feeling still. It lets time itself breathe. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine that instead of a ticking clock or a day-night cycle, every real-world month, the entire region quietly leans into a new season, as if the cartridge has decided to follow the weather outside your window. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. For every bright Castelia skyline, there is a soft blanket of snow over Route 7. For every harsh desert sun on Route 4, there is a muted, rainy afternoon where the sand feels less like a battlefield and more like a memory. What makes Unova's seasons so interesting is that they don't just repaint the grass and trees. They change which Pokemon step forward, which weak little creature suddenly appears, and which familiar path feels just slightly out of reach, as if you've stumbled into a different year of your own life. You can feel it most clearly in Asira City. In warmer months, its marshes are shallow, restless water, filled with splashes, ripples, and the faintly frustrating hop of a Pokemon you didn't really want to battle, but ran into anyway. And yet, when winter comes, those same marshes freeze into pale, glassy platforms, the water sealed away, item balls marooned in the ice, and the whole place becomes a puzzle made of silence. Snow softens the sound of footsteps so that your character seems to tread more carefully, and the wind, which was always there, suddenly sounds lonelier. The same route in another season feels like a different save file. A bridge that once carried you over restless water now looks down on still frozen sheets. Tall grass that rustled with Patrat and Pidove might hide Deerling instead, its colors quietly shifting with the months, as if the Pokemon itself is keeping track of time for you. Some creatures only appear in certain seasons at all, which means the game is gently, almost politely, asking trainers to come back later, to revisit the same shoreline or forest, the way you might return to appear at dawn, then at dusk, just to see how the light has changed. Even the music drifts with the calendar. In Undella Town, that famously calm seaside track is already a lullaby, but as the seasons turn, subtle layers slide in and out. A few extra notes here, a slightly sparser arrangement there, until it feels less like a loop and more like a tide. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story where a background theme and a handful of weak random encounters work together to make you feel like you've arrived on the off-season, renting a room in a town that only truly wakes up when you're not there. Placed together, these little changes make Unova feel older than it is, like a region that existed before your file began and will keep going after you turn the system off. And then Black 2 and White 2 step in and ask a quieter, stranger question. What happens when it's not just the seasons that change, but the years, the gym leaders, the very shape of the towns themselves? In the next part, we'll walk into that Unova 2 years later and see what was quietly left behind. So as the years slide quietly forward in Unova, the map changes, the gym leaders grow older, and somewhere underneath all of that, the battles themselves begin to feel different too. like a familiar song played in a softer key. Settle in, close your eyes, and listen to the way the game's numbers, abilities, and weather start to whisper their own quiet stories. Black and White arrive with a whole tide of new tools for trainers, but they do it gently, almost politely. There are new abilities that nudge a weak creature into relevance, new moves that let something small finally hit the right target, and new items that sit in a bag until one thoughtful trainer realizes they turn a helpless support Pokémon into a tiny engine of survival. Even the way stats and damage work gets brushed and polished, not with loud announcements, but with small refinements that make battles feel smoother, more predictable, a little less frustrating when you're already half asleep on the couch. What makes Unova so interesting is how it treats the weather. For every short, temporary rain dance from earlier games, there is now a permanent drizzle, called in by an ability, and left to fall turn after turn, like a soft shower tapping on the window while you play. Drought, sand stream, snow warning. These no longer flicker on and off. They simply settle over the field, reshaping every choice, letting sun and rain become slow, constant companions to the battle rather than brief visitors. And yet, most of the time, you only notice it in the background, when a weak water type suddenly feels stronger, or a fragile fire creature wilts in the endless storm. Many of Unova's new Pokémon were built with these roles in mind, almost like chess pieces designed for tournaments rather than storybook adventures. There are fierce sand abusers, precise weather setters, clever support options that slip into doubles battles and quietly do their work. But even among the disappointments, the fish that seem to exist just to fill a route or decorate a pond, there are odd little niches. An unimpressive water type might learn a strange support move, or pair with a partner that protects it, turning something that looks completely helpless into a tiny cog in a larger sleepy machine. Then, without fanfare, Team Preview arrives. Before an online battle even begins, both trainers see the full list of opposing Pokémon, and the old guessing game changes into something calmer, more deliberate. Instead of fearing some unseen monster in the backslot, you quietly plan around the 6 faces on the screen, choosing leads, imagining switch-ins, building a strategy before a single attack is made. It feels almost like laying out chess pieces before the clock starts. A different kind of tension, softer but deeper. Placed together, these changes make Black and White feel like a slow, steady rainfall on the series battle system, wearing new grooves into familiar stone. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story of quiet design, of numbers, and moves arranged so carefully that most players never notice. In the next sections, we'll zoom in closer, onto specific Pokémon, sleepy locations, and even leftover data in the code. And we'll see how much thought was poured into creatures that seem weak, to areas that seem empty, and waters that, at first glance, look perfectly still. Imagine them drifting in the current, and we'll follow them there soon. If you settle in, close your eyes. You can almost feel the camera of the game drifting over Unova, sliding past the busy bridges and quiet ponds, then coming to rest on one strange patch of land that refuses to make up its mind. In Pokémon Black and White, there is a single space on the map that holds 2 different dreams, or 2 different answers to the same silent question about what this region should become. In Pokémon Black, that patch hardens into Black City, a dark, futuristic metropolis that feels like Castilia's sleepless cousin. Tall, angular buildings rise out of the ground like steel trees, their windows lit in sharp rectangles, and the air hums with the low electric glow of neon. Trainers wait there not to relax, but to battle, to test numbers and stats and items, time to chase money and power, beneath a sky that never quite brightens. For every cheerful seaside town in Unova, there is this lonely cluster of towers, where progress feels a little cold around the edges. Walk its streets slowly, and you notice how empty they can seem. How the few people who remain talk about strength, about work, about keeping up. There are no wild Pokemon splashing in puddles or rustling in the grass here. Only owned creatures called out for a quick fight, then tucked away again as the next opponent steps forward. What makes Black City so interesting is how unapologetically it chooses the human side of the equation. Commerce over quiet. Competition over comfort. A harsh truth that some trainers chase without ever wondering what was here before. In Pokemon White, that same spot on the map exhales instead and becomes White Forest. The towers sink back into the soil, replaced by tall, pale trees that filter the light into soft green fragments. And the ground is threaded with little ponds and patches of grass where weak, low-level Pokemon wander without much purpose. Time feels slower here, as if every step is cushioned by leaves and distant birdsong. And yet, there is a faintly frustrating sense that, in battle terms, not much of value is happening at all. You can meet simple creatures, catch them easily, watch them toddle along at the back of your team, a little helpless compared to the stronger partners you've trained elsewhere. Still, imagine them drifting in the current of this forest air, tiny ripples of life that exist for their own sake rather than for victory. Placed together, these two versions of the same land make Unova's theme of truth versus ideals feel very literal. Black City is the truth of ambition, numbers, and visible growth, while White Forest is the ideal of harmony, a place where nature is allowed to remain slightly inefficient, slightly unprofitable, but beautifully alive. One map tile, two futures. One question, two quiet answers. And as the lights of Black City flicker against the leaves of White Forest in your mind, it becomes hard not to wonder which place you'd rather wander through at night, while the rest of Unova sleeps and the story keeps moving on. Settle in, close your eyes, and let those two images linger for a moment. Neon glass and quiet trees, both claiming to be the real Unova. Because the game doesn't stop there. It doesn't just trade one patch of land and call it a day. It quietly rearranges whole moods, as if the region itself is asking whether progress should look like steel or like memory. Opelucid City is the clearest example, a kind of mirror held up to Unova's heart. In Pokemon Black, you arrive in a place that feels almost like Castilia's older, more disciplined sibling. Sleek towers, glowing lines, bright signs that hum softly above the streets, and a soundtrack built from sharp electronic tones that pulse like circuitry under your feet. The gym leader stands framed by mechanical dragons and digital motifs, and the whole city seems to say that power is something you build, refine, and upgrade, patch by patch, version by version. Then, in Pokemon White, you walk into Opelucid and find the same city, and yet not the same at all. The buildings are rounded and worn, the colors are softer, the pathways curl like old roots instead of slicing straight like metal beams, and the music trades its synthetic edge for warm flutes and gentle strings that sound as if they've been played here for generations. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story of a town that chose to remember instead of replace, to let its dragon motifs stay carved in stone rather than rendered in glowing panels. Placed together, these two Opelucids feel like parallel Unovas running side by side, one leaning toward progress and steel, the other toward memory and nature. and the player is never dragged into a loud speech about which is correct. For every chrome-lit avenue in black, there is a cobblestone echo in white. For every sharp synth note, there is a wistful wooden flute. And what makes Opelucid so interesting is that both versions still host the same gym, the same battles, the same weak little creatures wandering the grass just outside, as if truth and ideals can share a map without ever fully merging. Around them, smaller ripples keep the illusion going. Exclusive Pokémon slip into one cartridge or the other, changing which partners trainers grow attached to, which helpless water type gets carried all the way to the league, which dragon evolves on your team, and which one remains a frustrating, distant encounter. Minor NPCs change a line or two, in hinting that their memories, their tiny lives, have bent slightly toward technology in one world and toward tradition in the other, like two timelines that only barely remember being one. And yet, Unova doesn't freeze in this delicate balance. Time moves, buildings age, people leave. Black 2 and White 2 quietly ask what happens when those choices have a few more years to settle. When cities like Opelucid and places like Black City or White Forest are forced to live with the paths they took. Imagine them drifting in the current of time. One pulled toward glass and data, the other toward roots and leaves. The sequels will redraw the map, nudge roots and tilt that balance again. And the next version of Unova waiting on the horizon is stranger and softer than it first appears. So when the camera fades back in and the title reads, Black 2 and White 2, it isn't just a new adventure. It is that same Unova, tilted a few degrees and pushed 2 years down the river. For every fresh region that wipes the slate clean, there is this rare return. One of the only times in the main series where trainers come back to the same map and are quietly asked to notice what time has done to it. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a softer kind of sequel. The feeling you get when you walk a familiar street and the shop on the corner is gone, but the crack in the pavement is still in exactly the same place. Gyms stand where you remember them, yet the faces have changed. Sharon has stepped into a gym leader's role with the nervous confidence of a creature still learning its own power, while old leaders have drifted away, leaving only their names in NPC dialogue and in the gentle, frustrating gaps of your memory. What makes this so interesting is how ordinary the changes first seem. A new construction site on Route 4, a different layout of sand and stone, a bridge that feels a little busier. Trainers stand where they used to, and yet their teams have evolved. Their levels nudged upward. Their lines of dialogue adjusted just enough to remind you that they, too, have been battling in the background while your cartridge was asleep. Some of them even remember what happened with N and Team Plasma, speaking about those events like old weather, a storm they once watched roll in from the water. Undella Town might be the clearest example, and the most quietly melancholic. In Black and White, it is a sleepy seaside edge-of-the-world place. The kind of town where you could settle in, close your eyes, and listen to the soft, almost hesitant music that seems afraid to disturb the waves. 2 years later, the same coastline has become a resort, its theme rearranged into something brighter and busier. And yet, if you listen closely, you can still hear the old melody woven underneath, like a memory that refuses to move out. Pattern interrupt. Even the villains have grown tired. Former Team Plasma members are scattered across Unova now, some standing alone on piers or in back streets, talking about atonement in small, halting sentences. Others cling to the old doctrine with a weak sort of stubbornness, arguing that Pokémon should be freed while their own underleveled partners fidget helpless beside them. still stuck in the same unevolved forms they used in that first failed revolution. Placed together, since these details turn background grunts into people carrying quiet, lingering regrets. And they turn routes into timelines, rather than just paths between cities. Returning to Black 2 and White 2 is like going back to a childhood beach as an adult. The sand is still there, the water still moves in and out, but the houses are taller, the noise is different, and the space between you and the shoreline has stretched. In the next sections, we'll walk that shoreline more slowly, stopping at the specific gyms, streets, and characters that changed just enough to make Unova feel familiar and not quite home anymore. And somewhere along that shoreline, between the tall glass of Castilia and the quiet water of Undella, you start to notice one more presence walking beside you, just out of step, just out of place. N doesn't crash into your journey the way other rivals do. He drifts in, soft-voiced and uncertain, like someone who has wandered into the wrong story and is too polite to leave. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story of a boy who isn't sure battles should exist at all. For every loud, overconfident rival who shouts about power and victory, there is N, who almost whispers his questions, who looks at your team not as tools, but as frightened creatures asking to be heard. What makes N so interesting is that he can hear them back. He listens to their voices in a way most trainers never can. And from that gift, he draws a painfully simple conclusion. Humans are hurting Pokémon, even when they smile. So when he challenges you to a battle, it feels less like a test of strength and more like a quiet argument about whether any of this should be happening. Placed together, these early encounters form a pattern. N steps in, asks if your partners are truly happy, and then tries, in his hesitant way, as to prove that releasing them is the only kindness. And yet, his certainty has cracks from the very beginning. On the Ferris wheel in Nimbasa, high above the city lights and the distant splash of the amusement park's water, he confesses his role in Team Plasma, with the same tone someone else might use to admit a secret fear. The ride is slow. The world turns beneath you, and the conversation feels like it could tip either way. Later, in N's castle, you find his room, and it feels like trespassing in someone's unfinished childhood. There are toys scattered on the floor, a single bed, and an emptiness that says more than any speech. Imagine them drifting in the current, those toys and memories, circling a boy who was never allowed to grow past the story he was given. His ideals are sharp, almost cruel, but the space he lives in is small and helpless, like a forgotten playroom sealed above a flood. As the plot moves toward Reshiram and Zekrom, toward truth and ideals, N's journey bends quietly alongside your own. You begin by treating Team Plasma as a simple nuisance. Their slogans about liberation, just another frustrating obstacle. But slowly you realize that the world is not as clean as good trainers and bad trainers, that some bonds are selfish and some battles really do leave scars. For every grand legendary, frozen in myth, there is this one human figure, walking softly, trying to decide if the whole system should be broken. By the time the credits fall, N has stepped away, his extremist vision softened into something more questioning, more willing to accept that truth and ideals might have to share the same fragile space. Settle in, close your eyes, and you can almost hear his footsteps still, faint on the bridges of Unova, in the post-game corners where he appears like a half-remembered thought. His story doesn't shout for attention. It lingers instead, a reminder that even after the battles end, So some questions keep quietly evolving in the background, waiting for you in the next stretch of road. And from that soft echo of footsteps, the story widens, because N was never walking alone. In the shadows just behind him, Team Plasma was always there, murmuring a different kind of lullaby to Unova. Settle in, close your eyes, and you can almost hear their first speeches in Accumulatown again. Not as a roar of villainy, but as a strangely gentle question. If Pokemon are living creatures with feelings, what gives trainers the right to capture them and send them into battle at all? What makes Team Plasma so interesting is that, at least on the surface, they don't stand on a mountain of stolen weapons or talk openly about ruling the world. They talk about liberation, about helpless partners who supposedly suffer in their Pokeballs, about a world where no weak thing has to fight just because someone stronger holds a command. For every blunt Team Rocket threat, there is a plasma rally that sounds almost like a protest, the kind that might make a tired player pause and, just for a moment, wonder whether that starter on their team is truly content with every feint and every frustrating loss. Visually, they lean into a different fantasy as well, trading sleek criminal uniforms for those odd, medieval, knight-inspired outfits, with flowing tabards and helmets that look just a little too big, like children dressing up in armor they haven't grown into. Around them stands Getsis, wrapped in his layered cloak, delivering speeches that feel almost religious in tone, his words rising and falling like a sermon about guilt and duty and hidden power. It's theatrical, even a little silly at times, and yet, placed together, these robes and rituals tap into something very real. The way people who feel powerless, or quietly ashamed of their own strength, can be drawn to anyone who promises to make the whole system feel less cruel. Early on, the encounters with their grunts are not the usual cartoon evil. Instead, they are confusing, even a bit melancholy, because some of them really do seem to believe they are rescuing Pokemon from a life of forced battle. You defeat them. You watch their weak teams crumble, and there's a faint sense that these are not hardened villains. It's just followers, clinging to a story that gives their helplessness shape. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a slow drip of doubt, seeping into the edges of every capture you make afterward. And then, when you finally climb the long, familiar path to the Pokemon League, expecting the usual triumph, the pattern breaks. The castle rises around the hall like a stone flower unfolding in reverse, swallowing the proud building in silence. And for a few quiet moments, the game asks you to imagine them drifting in the current together. Trainers, champions, and Pokemon, all pulled into a question about whether the whole structure deserves to stand. The Victory Road climax doesn't explode. It's interrupted, gently but firmly, by a challenge to the entire idea of what a trainer is supposed to be. By the time Black 2 and White 2 arrive, those whispered ideals have splintered, and Team Plasma's legacy feels as fractured as any real-world movement that lost its way. Some former members regret trying to care for abandoned Pokemon in the wake of Getsis's manipulation, while others double down, radicalizing further into a colder, more aggressive group that clings to the shell of liberation without its heart. For every penitent, plasma grunt quietly feeding a stray creature in Driftvale, there is another planning one more desperate strike, and Unova itself seems to stand between them, like a region still deciding what truth and what ideal it wants to keep. The question, of course, is what you choose to carry forward with you, and which forgotten corners of Unova are still holding on to the answers in the dark. And somewhere behind those questions, behind the grunts and the quiet alleys, and the soft splash of water in Drift Vale's harbor, two much older arguments are still echoing. They aren't shouted in a crowded street or decided in a single battle. They sleep in stone, in legend, in the shapes of two dragons that used to be one. Long before any trainers walked Unova's routes, the story says there was a single original dragon, a creature so complete that it held both truth and ideals, without needing to pull them apart. When the twin heroes who guided it began to disagree, the dragon did what stories love to do. It split, not into simple good and evil, but into Reshiram and Zekrom, each quietly convinced that it kept the more important half. For every calm statement of truth, there is a soaring, impossible ideal, and Unova's history is balanced right on that fault line. Reshiram, with its white fur and soft, almost feathery tail turbine, carries fire that doesn't just burn for spectacle, but feels like a hearth or a sunrise. A warmth that says, "This is how the world really is." Zekrom, all dark armor and humming coils, surrounds itself with electricity that doesn't crackle for attention so much as it hums like distant power lines. A current that lights up what could be. These are not loud, helpless creatures flailing for attention. They are steady forces, like a campfire and a generator, both able to keep a region alive in very different ways. What makes Reshiram and Zekrom so interesting is how quietly the games place you beside one of them. In Pokemon Black, you meet Reshiram. In Pokemon White, you meet Zekrom, and you never have to stand on a podium and declare, "I choose truth," or "I choose ideals." You just pick a version, maybe because the box art looks cool, maybe because a friend took the other, and suddenly your journey is tilted, just slightly, toward one side of that ancient argument. Settle in, close your eyes, and you can almost feel the game smiling at how simple that choice seemed at the time. By the time you reach the final tower, N is waiting with his own legendary, and the two of you stand there like mirrored pages. One trainer, one dragon, one belief trying to prove itself in battle. This is not a story of glory or victory, not really. It's two people saying, "I think the world should be like this," and letting their Pokemon speak for them. And yet, the clash never quite feels like light versus darkness. It's more like watching two thunderstorms roll past the same city from different directions. Then, a small pattern breaks the lull. After the credits, the dragons don't simply vanish into myth again. Their ruins linger, their stones and tablets scattered through Unova's quieter corners. In Black and White, two new chambers, strange devices, and half-buried lore hint that the original dragon story isn't finished, that the split between truth and ideals might one day be stitched back together. Placed together, these scattered details turn the region into a slow-burning mystery, inviting you to return to Unova's ancient history later. When the battles are done, and you're just walking, listening, and wondering what other sleeping legends are waiting under the dust. And when those legends grow quiet again, Unova asks you to look somewhere smaller, somewhere softer, where the only roar is the sound of the tide folding in and out. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture the region not from the top of Dragon Spiral Tower, but from the edge of a wooden pier, where the water moves in slow, patient lines and the weakest creatures leave the lightest ripples. To the west, near Drift Vale, the currents don't crash or threaten. They just slide under the drawbridge, brown and heavy, carrying little flocks of water-type Pokemon that most trainers never really study. Some are there only as silhouettes while you cross. A flash of a fin, a ring of bubbles, a reminder that underneath all the trade routes and market stalls, there is this quiet river that doesn't care about battle or story or power. And yet, those waters are just as much Unova as any legendary cutscene. On the far side of the map, Undella Town barely pretends to be part of an adventure at all. The surf there is gentle, almost lazy, rolling against the sand while villas sit in the background, like they're on vacation from a different game. You walk along the shore, the music looping in a slow, wistful pattern, and when you fish, the game often rewards you with something weak, something helpless, some little water type that feels more like background noise than a partner. It's frustrating for a moment, and then it just becomes part of the rhythm. What makes Basculin so interesting is how perfectly it fits that role. For every mighty Gyarados, there is a Basculin, splashing in place, pretending to be fierce. It has different forms, red-striped and blue-striped, with slightly different abilities and a surprisingly aggressive face, as if it's trying very hard to convince both you and itself that it matters. Most trainers see it while surfing or fishing, sigh once, and run from the battle without a second thought. This is not a story of glory or victory for Basculin. Its stats are serviceable, but forgettable. Its move pool workable, but dull. And even when it evolves in later generations, that reputation of, oh, it's just Basculin, never really washes off. Imagine them drifting in the current, dozens of nearly identical fish bumping into each other, each encounter blurring into the next until they become part of the scenery, like the posts of a pier or the foam on the surface. Placed together, these weak, overlooked water types echo Black and White's broader habit of hiding details in plain sight. A rainy route you only cross once, a pond behind a warehouse, a little patch of ripples that never holds anything rare, but still feels necessary. And some players feel a twinge of disappointment when the rod shakes and another Basculin appears. Yet those tiny letdowns stitch the journey into something slow and strangely comforting. As we drift further, we'll keep returning to these watery edges of Unova. The docks where the camera tilts just so, the beaches that seem too quiet, the rain-soaked routes where puddles mirror the sky. In the next stretches, we'll sink a little deeper into these overlooked pools and harbors, uncovering facts that might change how you remember every small splash that once made you groan, and might now help you fall asleep instead. So from those quiet docks and rain-soaked routes, the journey carries you forward until the water suddenly opens up into something bigger, brighter, and taller than almost anything Unova has shown you so far. You step off a simple boat, and in that moment, Castelia City doesn't just appear, it unfolds. The camera panning slowly across the skyline, while the harbor below reflects every window and billboard, like a softly shifting mirror. The water here feels different from the lonely ponds where weak little fish Pokémon splash helplessly. It's busy, layered, full of movement, and yet it has this strange calm, as if the harbor itself is taking a slow breath while trainers rush past. As the boat glides in, the long shadows of skyscrapers stretch across the bay, and the game lingers just long enough for you to notice how the ripples bend those lines of light, as though the whole city is being gently stirred by some unseen creature beneath the surface. What makes Castelia so interesting is the way it borrows the shape of Manhattan, but softens it, turning sharp angles and dense streets into something more approachable, almost cozy. The piers jut out like careful steps into the water, each one a little stage for NPCs, cargo, and the distant promise of ships from other regions that never quite arrive on screen. For every real-world tower of glass and noise, there is a Castelia alley, narrow and shaded, where the game lets you slow down, listen to your own footsteps, and forget that this is supposed to be a bustling hub at all. Walk along the harbor, and you start to notice the tiny details the story never points at directly. NPCs on the piers murmur about vessels from distant lands, hinting at regions you know and others you can only imagine, while the background track shifts ever so slightly as you move from the main streets to the waterfront, trading busy city percussion for something softer, more fluid. Hidden items glint near the edge of the water, tucked behind crates or lampposts, quietly rewarding the player who doesn't mind looking a little foolish, pressing A against every empty tile. Castelia is where important things happen. Story beats with Team Plasma, side quests, office buildings crammed with trainers who want a battle, and yet, it's astonishing how easy it is to miss entire rooms, even whole floors if you hurry. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a reminder that, in a place this dense, the most satisfying power you have is simply the choice to walk slowly, to check the back door instead of the front, to talk to the one creature standing alone at the end of the pier. And yet, beneath all that bustle, Castelia still hides secrets that only appear if you linger by the water a little longer. The Royal Unova waits as a quiet reward, a cruise ship that doesn't offer legendary strength or broken items, just a different angle on the same harbor lights, while anonymous office towers conceal NPCs, gifts, and quiet jokes about work that most players will never see. Imagine them drifting in the current. The overlooked sailors, the unchallenged clerks, the weak little water types bobbing against the pier as the city glows above them. Because just past this glittering harbor, Unova has one more shoreline that bends the rules of time itself. And if you thought Castelia's lights were strange, what waits there is even more unsettling in its stillness. Undella is where Unova stops shouting and starts whispering. After Castelia's neon, and the ferries, and the weak little water types bobbing against the pier, you step onto this pale, crescent shore, and the whole game seems to exhale. In the original black and white, Undella Town is almost nothing, and that's what makes it everything. A few houses, a quiet bay, a soft stretch of sand where barely any trainers bother to stand around pretending they want to battle. The music loops in slow, gentle arcs, like waves that have forgotten how to crash and are content to just roll in, then slide back out again. It's the kind of track that could play for hours without changing, and you might not even notice because it simply settles behind your thoughts like distant surf at night. If you settle in, close your eyes, you can almost feel how the melody sways. A simple figure, a few notes rising and falling, never in a hurry, never forcing itself forward. For every bombastic gym theme or tense Team Plasma encounter, there is this one small town that refuses to speed up, a place where even the water-type Pokemon feel too relaxed to be properly frustrating. A Frillish here, a Mantike there, drifting in the bay like half-asleep ornaments, and yet, 2 years later, in Black 2 and White 2, you come back, and something has shifted. The shoreline is the same shape, the water is the same gentle blue, but Undella has been discovered. Villas sprout along the coast like expensive shells. More trainers wander the sand, and the whole place has that slightly cluttered look of a resort that's learned how to charge admission. The music is still recognizably Undella's theme, but it walks a little quicker now, with a brighter rhythm and a few extra notes that feel like footsteps instead of waves. What makes Undella so interesting is that nothing about this change is ever shouted at you. No cutscene announces a tourism boom. No NPC delivers a lecture on coastal development. Placed together, These two versions of the same town quietly tell a story. First, the sleepy retreat, then the busier getaway. The same melody, evolving as if the town itself has leveled up, not into something stronger in battle, but into something louder in life. Tucked inside this calm, there is another hint that Undella is special. Cynthia, the Sinnoh champion, choosing this little bay as her off-season refuge. A trainer of overwhelming power, hiding in a rented house beside a beach where most creatures can barely threaten a towel. It's almost funny, this towering presence squeezed into such a gentle setting, like finding a legendary in a paddling pool. If you've ever gone back to a childhood beach or a cafe that used to be quiet until everyone else discovered it, you know the feeling Undella is playing with. The view is familiar, but the tempo is different. The memories are the same, but the background noise has grown. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story of time, told in a few simple chords, asking softly whether the places you love can evolve without losing what you were resting in to begin with. And just beyond that changing shoreline, Unova holds one more place where time doesn't simply pass, it fractures, and the sea itself seems to remember who walked its edge. Out past that fractured shoreline, the world doesn't just split into versions and timelines. It splits quietly inside the cartridge itself, into things you were meant to see and things you were never supposed to touch. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine Unova, not as a map on the screen, but as a stack of soft, layered currents of code, where unfinished ideas drift like slow-moving debris at the bottom of a deep, still lake. Like most games, Black and White carry their share of leftovers, the weak scraps of experiments that never quite evolved into full features, yet still hum faintly beneath every battle and every step. There are unused trainer classes tucked away in the data, labels for opponents that never stand across from you, like ghostly challengers who were scheduled for a fight and then quietly told to wait off stage forever. For every polished ace trainer or fisherman you actually meet, there is a half-formed Battle Girl variant, or strange early-class name that simply watches from the code, helpless to ever send out a single Pokemon. What makes Unova's hidden side so interesting is how physical it sometimes feels. Data miners have found test maps and early layouts, little boxy rooms and rough corridors that suggest different plans for how you would first walk through this region. Imagine them drifting in the current. A Route 4 that stays more like a construction zone, a Castelia backstreet that bends a different way, a fragment of a cave that leads nowhere, just a square of rock and water left behind when the real path was carved. Placed together, these broken rooms and empty spaces look like the shed skins of a creature that kept growing and changing until the final version slipped free. And yet, the most soothing part might be how slowly these shapes emerge. Fans and data miners don't uncover everything at once. They move carefully, year after year, treating the game's code like a dark ocean where strange silhouettes occasionally appear in the distance. An unused script here, a leftover animation there, a line of dialogue that hints at a different story beat, or a more ambitious feature that was scaled down until it felt simple and clean on the surface. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story of gentle, frustrating almosts. Some discoveries suggest alternate pacing for the tale of truth and ideals. Little signs that certain encounters might have come earlier or later, or that a minor character once had more power in the plot before being quietly pushed to the background. For every Reshiram or Zikrom blazing across the sky, there is a forgotten flag in the code that once tried to decide whether a cutscene should play at all. It's strangely comforting to know that even a confident region like Unova spent time being unsure. In that way, these hidden pieces feel a lot like the weak, overlooked water-type Pokemon we've been drifting alongside. The ones that seem helpless, that never dominate a battle, that irritate trainers with low stats and shallow move pools. And yet, with just a little imagination, you can see what they almost became. Some stories, in black and white, are told by grand speeches and legendary creatures. Some are told by what you never quite see on screen, by the quiet data that never evolves, resting patiently beneath the waves while we move on to the next tide. And then, when the waves quiet down and the ocean roots of Unova fall away behind you, the game offers a different kind of tide, the slow or mechanical current of the battle subway under Nimbasa City. Here, time does not crash or roar. It hums. Trains slide in, doors sigh open, and you step into a carriage where battles repeat like gentle waves against a steel shoreline. The same soft lights, the same seats, the same faint vibration underfoot as the tunnel loops on and on. For every dramatic gym showdown or legendary creature framed by stormy skies, there is this strangely peaceful corridor of repetition where trainers line up like commuters and you quietly test your strength. The structure is simple on the surface. One line for single battles, one for doubles, one for multi-battles where you share the field with a partner. And yet, what makes the battle subway so interesting is how quickly that simplicity turns hypnotic. You select a move, you watch the animation, you hear the subdued chime of victory, and you slide one seat down the carriage as the train keeps moving. Some players found it frustrating, this endless sequence of similar opponents and familiar Pokemon. But for others, it became a place to settle in, close your eyes, metaphorically at least, and let the pattern carry them. The weak links in a team are exposed here, not through sudden drama, but through quiet attrition, as a fragile water type faints to the same Thunderbolt 3 battles in a row, or a helpless support creature sits there clicking protect until the rhythm of the battle lulls you into a kind of waking sleep. At the center of this loop stand Ingo and Emmett, the subway bosses, like twin conductors of a very peculiar orchestra. Their matching uniforms, mirrored poses, and patterned speech turn each encounter into a little ritual. The introductions, the slightly odd phrasing, the way they talk about arriving and departing, as if every battle were just another stop on a timetable that never ends. They are eccentric, almost theatrical, and yet oddly comforting, like familiar station announcements you could recite from memory. Placed together, these repetitive fights, these calm tunnels, and these strange brothers turn the battle subway into one of Unova's quietest, competitive laboratories. Away from the main story's speeches about truth and ideals, trainers could refine items, natures, and movesets, nudging a timid water Pokemon into something with real power, or discovering that a supposed star was too weak to survive a long streak. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of adjustment, of tiny changes made between departures. And then, years later, legends. Arceus reached back through time and pulled one of those conductors off his train, dropping Ingo into an ancient land with no tracks, no carriages, and no brother at his side, turning what once felt like a self-contained facility into a fragment of a much larger stranger puzzle. If a single subway boss could slip the rails of Unova like that, what else beneath this region might not be as fixed as it seems? If Ingo can simply slip sideways out of Unova, it almost makes sense that the region itself keeps offering little doors to step through, places where the usual rhythm of battle and badges softens into something quieter. Unova is modeled on a bustling city full of steel and motion, and yet, tucked between train lines and high-rise gyms, there are stages and studios where nothing is urgent, nothing is truly at stake, and this is not a story of glory or victory. You feel that first in Nimbasa City, when the game gently points you toward the Pokémon musical. For every hardened battle subway regular, there is a trainer who wanders into that ornate theater instead, trading damage calculations for dress-up accessories and spotlights. What makes Nimbasa's musical so interesting is how little it asks of you. You pick a weak little hat or a bow. You pin it to a creature that might otherwise be expected to fight, and then you simply watch as it shuffles, twirls, or stands there a bit helpless on stage, framed by music rather than by health bars. Sitting through a musical is almost startling in how passive it feels. There are no frantic inputs, no frustrating misses, no fear that your favorite water type will faint before it evolves into something with real power. The sequence just plays out. A gentle animation of your Pokémon waving and posing, while the crowd reacts in soft, looping motions. It's calm, almost like the game is telling you to settle in, close your eyes for a moment. And remember that these are also performers and companions, not only tools for winning. Some players try it once and never return, but for others, it becomes a small ritual between gym battles, a place to breathe. Then, in Black 2 and White 2, that quiet detour gets a stranger cousin across the bay at Pokestar Studios. Here, battles are still present, but they've been turned into scripted movie scenes, with lines to follow and multiple endings that care more about drama than damage output. Imagine them drifting in the current of a storyboard. Your Pokémon is told exactly when to attack, when to act helpless, when to unleash power for maximum cinematic effect. It can be oddly funny watching a fierce creature pretend to lose on purpose, because the director wants a tragic finale. Placed together, these two distractions sketch out a Unova that has its own entertainment industry, its own culture of audiences, actors, and fans, existing quietly alongside gyms and villain teams. Trainers can film sequels, collect posters, or just let their partners wear silly props for no practical reason at all, and yet, these moments make the region feel lived in, like a place where people care about more than strength. Many will ignore them or rush past on the way to the next badge, but they sit there like optional dreams you can step into and out of at will, soft side paths that prepare you for the next stranger detour the region is hiding just off the main road. So now, instead of chasing those side paths, let the region slow down for you a little, and imagine that Unova has slipped quietly into a gentle rain. The bright whites of Route 4 are darker now, the harsh desert tiles softened under a thin film of water, and shallow puddles collect between the construction barriers, each one sending out ripples whenever a single drop falls in. This is not a story of glory or victory. This is a small pause between them. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture the long bridges stretching across the water. Their metal rails slick and dark, tiny beads of rain sliding down the cables, while the distant lights of passing trains blur into soft streaks. Footsteps are slower here, more careful, and the usual cries of wild Pokémon feel muffled, as if the whole soundtrack has been turned down just a little. Even a loud, overeager ducklet sounds weaker when it's arguing with the patter of rain on steel. You walk at an unhurried pace along Route 4, sand turned to damp, packed earth. The storm drains along the roadside, gurgling softly as they collect the runoff. The in-game music is still there, but the percussion has faded behind the steady hiss of falling water, and battle animations feel strangely distant, like someone else's fight happening in another room. For every tense gym match, there is this, a stretch of road where trainers simply drift past one another, hoods up, eyes half closed, not really looking for a battle at all. Castilia's piers are different in the rain. The glossy skyscrapers are smudged behind a thin gray veil, and the water in the harbor is a flat sheet of pewter, disturbed only by lazy circles, where weak little basculins surface. Then think better of it and sink back down. Imagine them drifting in the current. Not fierce, not impressive, just part of the quiet machinery that keeps this city of glass and light feeling like a place where real creatures live. On the outskirts of Nimbasa, the bright neon of the amusement park reflects in long, wavering streaks across rain-dark asphalt, and the Ferris wheel turns slowly, almost reluctantly, its cabins lit like sleepy lanterns. Even here, where trainers usually rush to chase power and prizes, the drizzle makes everything feel slightly helpless and out of focus, as if the whole route has decided that tonight, battles can wait until morning. Farther out, near Pinwheel Forest, the trees catch most of the rainfall, so what reaches you is a softened version, a hush of droplets sliding from leaf to leaf before they finally tap against the ground. The cries of bug-type Pokemon are blurred into the background, and even the more aggressive ones feel less threatening when their wings are heavy and their patterns smudge into the mist. You don't need to remember any particular fact right now, or hold on to which version has which city, or how a certain weak water type evolves into something stronger. This is just a moment to breathe and let Unova walk for you. The region is still there, its secrets and strange mechanics ticking quietly in the background, but they're content to wait at the edge of your awareness. And yet, as the rain begins to lighten, as the mist over Drift Vale's rivers lifts, and the last drops slide from the ropes of its bridges, more of those hidden stories start to come into focus again. Little differences between black and white, small, but frustrating details about overlooked Pokemon, the kind of things most trainers never see, begin to shimmer at the surface like reflections after a storm. If you choose to stay awake a little longer, we can follow those ripples outward and see what else the quiet rain has uncovered. Those ripples don't just touch the water itself, they reach the people who live along the shoreline. In Unova, if you settle in, close your eyes, and listen a little, the gym leaders stop feeling like distant bosses and start to sound like neighbors, co-workers, and slightly overworked public servants who just happen to command terrifying creatures in battle. What makes Unova so interesting is how often those leaders are pulled out of their spotless arenas and dropped into ordinary life. Lenora isn't just a normal-type specialist. She is a museum director first, fussing over fossils and stolen artifacts, worrying about history being taken away from her city. Berg isn't trapped forever in a bug-type room. He wanders Castalia's streets like a distracted artist, talking about inspiration, murals, and how frustrating it is when a canvas refuses to cooperate. Elisa steps off her glittering catwalk and into the role of mediator, a model who uses her fame to gently nudge a stubborn parent toward understanding their child's journey. For every towering dragon master in a distant league, there is a gym leader here, arguing with security staff, checking exhibits, or getting lost in their own thoughts between shows. And yet, when Team Plasma appears, these same figures quietly shift from local workers into protectors. You see Berg rush to help pin down grunts in Castilia, not because the story demands a boss rush, but because this is his city, his alleys, his harbor. Clay doesn't just sit in his mine waiting for challengers. He drags plasma out of their hiding places, like a foreman tired of slackers. A man who knows every tunnel and expects trouble to respect the rules. Placed together, these moments turn gym leaders into allies rather than isolated obstacles. When Skyla offers a lift in her cargo plane, or Bryson steps away from the stage lights of his movie career to stand with you, it feels less like a scripted cameo and more like a town rallying around a problem. This is not a story of glory or victory, so much as a story of grown-ups trying to keep things together while strange ideals swirl overhead. Across the 2-year gap, into Black 2 and White 2, that sense of life keeps evolving. Sharon, once a slightly frustrated rival, reappears as an early-game normal-type leader, a teacher who has traded pure ambition for a classroom full of new trainers. Bianca, the scatterbrained childhood friend, quietly becomes Professor Juniper's assistant, a researcher who still trips over her own thoughts but now helps guide others. These aren't dramatic evolutions of power. They're small promotions, gentle shifts that make Unova feel like it keeps moving even when you turn the game off. And if you wander further from the bright arenas, the same quiet humanity trickles down into ordinary houses and offices. Receptionists worry about schedules. Sailors on the docks mention the weather. A clerk in a corner shop talks about their day off, all while weak, slightly helpless Pokemon nap beside them like pets rather than weapons. Imagine them drifting in the current of city life. The Herdier at the museum desk, the Patra on warehouse patrol, the Frillish bobbing near the pier. They rarely shine in battle, and yet they anchor these places, making every street feel lived in. It leaves a soft question hanging in the air. If the adults and their partners are this grounded, what other small, easily missed details might be hiding in Unova's background, waiting just off-screen for a patient trainer to notice? So from that quiet question hanging over Unova's streets, the game offers a soft answer in an unexpected place. The save file itself remembers. Settle in, close your eyes, and think about how unusual that is for a Pokemon adventure, where each cartridge is usually a sealed little world, politely pretending the last journey never happened. In Black 2 and White 2, Memory Link slips between those sealed worlds like a thin thread, tying your old black or white data to the new game. And suddenly this is not a story of glory or victory, but of recollection. By connecting the games, trainers unlock flashbacks and extra dialogue, as if the region has been quietly keeping a diary while you were away. For every fresh start on a new title screen, there is a faint echo of the last run, still rippling under the surface. What makes Memory Link so interesting is the way it turns familiar faces into people with a past you can actually see. Instead of Bianca simply appearing again as a slightly scatterbrained assistant, you're shown the exact moment she received her first Pokemon. That little scene where a weak, nervous girl tries to hold on to a new creature and a new responsibility at the same time. Charon, who could have stayed a flat, efficient rival, gets flashbacks of wrestling with his ambitions, wondering what strength really means when every battle starts to feel like a test he might fail. Placed together, these short scenes are small, almost fragile things, and yet they change how the player reads every later encounter. When Bianca trips over her own plans, you remember that first awkward gift of a starter. When Chiron stands in his gym, trying to project power he doesn't always feel, you remember the boy who questioned himself in the snow. Even the weakest little moments, a line here, a glance there, begin to feel like history instead of filler. Then the pattern quietly spreads outward. Some NPCs, the ones who would normally be forgettable background, suddenly reference events from your previous adventure, if Memory Link is active. A trainer mentions what you did at N's castle. Another recalls rumors of your old team, as though the battles you fought in one cartridge have leaked into the gossip of the next. It is a gentle illusion, but a convincing one. Your actions don't just vanish when the credits roll. Imagine them drifting in the current. 2 years of unseen time, gym leaders changing jobs, routes shifting, new construction rising where old roots once lay. Memory Link reinforces that Unova is not a static map, but a place where time passes and people remember. Even if the player has moved on, even if the old party of weak, half-trained partners now lives only in data. And just like Memory Link, there are other subtle systems and callbacks woven through Black, White, and their sequels, tiny details waiting to surface for anyone patient, enough to notice that the region itself is watching and quietly keeping score. Almost like the region is quietly turning pages in a book you didn't realize you were reading. And nowhere does Unova flip those pages more gently than in its cities, the places where trainers pause between battle and travel, and where time is written into concrete, water, and music instead of dialogue boxes. Castelia City is the first big shock, the moment when Unova stops feeling like a route and starts feeling like a world. Its harbor is crowded with ships that go nowhere on screen, a forest of masts and metal that simply sits there, humming with the suggestion of trade, migration, and unseen weak little creatures sloshing around in the cargo holds. What makes Castelia so interesting is that the game never forces you to stand there and watch the waves. You can sprint straight to the gym if you like. But if you settle in, close your eyes for a second, you can almost hear the slow machinery of a region in motion, a present tense that never quite rests. Then, much later, the tide takes you to Undella Town, where time moves in the opposite direction, stretching out instead of rushing forward. In Black and White, Undella is a quiet resort at the edge of the map, with that soft and drifting music that feels like it was written for late-night players and half-asleep minds. In Black 2 and White 2, the same shoreline is busier, more popular, its theme remixed with a brighter, almost smug little bounce, as if the town itself knows it has become a destination instead of a secret. For every peaceful, empty beach in the original games, there is a busier, louder shoreline in the sequels, and yet nothing about it is announced in a cutscene. The change is just there, waiting for anyone patient enough to notice. Opelucid City takes that idea and turns it into a crossroads. In Pokémon Black, it becomes a futuristic grid of neon and metal, a place where the music pulses like a machine, and the old stories feel like they are being pushed out by progress. In Pokémon White, the same gym, the same dragon lore, sits inside a traditional town with warmer colors and instruments that sound older, like a memory that refuses to fade. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of two versions of the same place, quietly arguing about whether the past or the future should be louder. Placed together, these three cities become a slow conversation about change. Castelia as the restless present, Undella as a once helpless little resort, turning fashionable, Opelucid as the moment where tradition and technology share the same narrow street. None of it is shouted. It lives in architecture, in NPCs who mention tourists and old days, in tracks that evolve while no Pokémon actually evolves on screen. The games reward the kind of trainer who walks instead of runs, who lets the surf music loop one more time, who finds a strange comfort in watching a harbor that never truly sleeps. And just as the cities grow, fade, and shift around you, the quieter corners of Unova are changing too. Out in the ruins, forests, and hidden caves, where the stories are stranger, the details sharper, and some of the most unsettling little facts are waiting in the dark. Out beyond the harbors and the neon, Unova has a place where the wind never quite calms down, where the world feels sandblasted and distant, as if the whole region took a step back and whispered instead of shouted. The desert resort and Relic Castle sit there like a forgotten thought, a harsh stretch of sand that somehow feels peaceful. The kind of place where you could almost settle in, close your eyes, and let the sound of the sandstorm become a kind of static lullaby. The horizon blurs under constant grit, trainers trudging forward with weak visibility and weaker footing, half-buried stairways and broken pillars poking out of the dunes like the bones of a long-lost creature. There is very little water here, almost none, which makes it oddly fitting that so many Pokémon you meet feel dry, fragile, and a little helpless, in flinching under every ground-type move, and struggling through frustrating battles as the storm quietly chips away at their health. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a slow sinking into history, where every step downward feels like moving further away from the bright Unova everyone talks about. Deep inside Relic Castle, the tone changes from blinding light to muffled echo, and the lore starts to press in around you. What makes Relic Castle so interesting is the way it quietly ties into the story of the original dragon, the two heroes, and that old argument between truth and ideals that still shapes Unova's present. For every Reshiram soaring above a white-hot ideal, there is Zekrom humming with dark, grounded truth. And somewhere beneath them both, these sand-choked corridors suggest a time before either side had fully taken shape, when the kingdom was whole and the dragon was one. Placed together, these collapsing floors and silent statues feel less like a dungeon and more like a memory the region is trying not to lose. And yet, at the very bottom, past the slipping sand and the trainers who seem oddly resigned to being buried here, waits Volcarona, glowing in the gloom like a small, contained sunrise. It isn't framed with the usual legendary fanfare. There's no grand speech, no roaring cutscene, just a quiet room and a Pokémon treated almost like a guardian or deity that never left its post, even as the castle above it cracked and fell away. Encountering Volcarona doesn't feel like a typical legendary battle. It feels like you've walked in on something ancient that was going to keep burning, whether or not any trainer ever arrived to test its power. And in Black and White, then later in Black 2 and White 2, the castle itself shifts around that ember, to new chambers opening as old ones collapse, sand filling in some paths, while others are finally exposed. Like Unova is slowly deciding which parts of its past it's ready to show. The sequels don't rewrite the ruins so much as nudge them, reminding you that history in this region evolves too, just like any ordinary Pokémon trying to grow out of a weak first form. Maybe that's the quiet trick of Relic Castle. The more it reveals, the less certain anything feels. Unova's ruins don't hand out clear answers. They offer atmosphere, questions, and the gentle suggestion that some stories are meant to be sat with rather than solved. And if this is what the desert is willing to share, half buried and half forgotten, what else might be waiting in the colder, darker corners of Unova, where the sand gives way to something much stranger? From the dry hush of the desert, the camera drifts outward and downward, and the sand slowly gives way to water, ear to that soft blue around Undella Town, where the waves seem gentle enough to trust. Settle in, close your eyes for a moment, and imagine slipping beneath that calm surface. Because Unova hides one of its strangest stories, not in a tower or a temple, but in a flooded maze that barely acknowledges you're there at all. The abyssal ruins sit far below Undella Bay, an underwater labyrinth that feels more like a forgotten thought than a proper dungeon. A place you can only visit in short, pressured bursts before the game quietly pushes you back to the light. There is no battle music here, just that eerie, echoing track and the muffled sound of your own steps as you wade through rooms tiled with ancient symbols, every wall and floor covered in unreadable text that stares back like it's judging how small and weak you really are. What makes the abyssal ruins so interesting is how stubbornly mechanical it is beneath that stillness. To even reach it, trainers need surf and dive, and once you're inside, an invisible step limit ticks away with every hesitant move, threatening to end your exploration mid-corridor and send you helplessly back to the surface. For every leisurely stroll through Castalia's docks, there is this tight, underwater countdown, forcing you to plan routes, count tiles, and accept that a wrong turn means the whole attempt dissolves into bubbles. And yet, the ruins reward that quiet, methodical mindset. Certain paths only open if you follow precise routes, stepping on particular tiles in the right order, or circling pillars like you're performing a ritual the game never properly explains. Some items only appear after those secret conditions are met, as if the ruins are testing how patient you're willing to be with a place that never fights you, never talks to you, but still feels oddly confrontational in its design. Those strange inscriptions, once thought to be decorative nonsense, can actually be decoded into a long, halting message about an ancient king, a proud kingdom, and a civilization that sank beneath the waves long before modern trainers started tossing weak little water Pokemon into Undella's surf. Placed together, these lines sketch a story of a ruler, of offerings to a god, of punishment and loss, adding another layer to Unova's deep past that quietly echoes the region's bigger themes of truth, ideals, and the ruins left behind when power slips away. The corridors themselves are littered with treasures that feel oddly out of reach at first. Elemental plates that whisper of Arceus, relic crowns and relic vases and other strange antiques that do nothing in battle, yet sell for absurd amounts if you find the right appraiser. You dive again and again, tracing the same silent loops, turning a frustrating time limit into a slow ritual of gathering wealth in a place where nothing actually evolves, nothing attacks, and everything feels slightly out of time. Imagine them drifting in the current. The relic statue, the relic gold, the plates quietly resting on the seafloor, like forgotten trophies from a contest no one remembers winning. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story you only piece together if you care enough to read between the tiles, to translate symbols that never ask to be understood. Many players never fully explore or decode the abyssal ruins at all, leaving this entire submerged kingdom as a half-remembered dream beneath Undella's calm surface. A drowned whisper that lingers in the back of your mind as you move on to brighter cities and louder legends, never quite sure what else might be waiting in the deeper dark. So let that drowned whisper linger a moment longer, then let it loosen and fade, as if the whole abyssal ruins are exhaling you back out into the open sea. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture yourself drifting just above the seabed near Undella, where the water is clear enough that the sun still remembers you, but dim enough that the world above already feels very far away. Below, the pale outlines of the ruins appear, not as sharp walls or detailed carvings now, but as gentle shapes in the murk, like a memory that refuses to come fully into focus. You're not sprinting for items or counting steps anymore. There is no timer ticking down, no pressure, no need to prove anything in a battle. You simply hover there, a quiet observer, while the light filters down in soft columns, touching broken arches and scattered tiles with the same indifferent care it gives to legendary Pokémon and the weakest little fish. The movement here is slow and weightless, more like the surfing animations in the games stretched out into a single, unbroken breath. Forward, then back. A small turn to the left, a lazy drift to the right. Imagine them drifting in the current. Not just you, but every weak creature that Unova hides in its waters. All the Basculin that never quite impressed trainers. All the Frillish that felt more like decorative ghosts than real threats. For every sharp-jawed Gyarados in some distant region, there is a Basculin here, bumping along in the background, present but rarely chosen. One slips past you now, its striped body tilting slightly as the current nudges it along, eyes alert but not hostile, as if it has finally accepted that tonight, this is not a story of glory or victory. A Frillish floats by at a careful distance, tentacles trailing like loose ribbons, too polite to startle you, too gentle to drain anything more than a little attention, before it glides away again. And yet, none of them attack, none of them challenge. They are simply sharing the same quiet space beneath the surface, weak, overlooked, and strangely peaceful. If your thoughts wander here, that's all right. It's okay if the details blur, if you forget which route leads where, or how many floors the abyssal ruins really have. The facts of Unova keep flowing in the background like muffled echoes from that submerged city. That this was the first region modeled after a place like New York. That its roots and forests were built on the idea of truth and ideals pulling against each other like tides. Placed together, these little fragments become a soft hum rather than a lecture, a gentle reminder that the world of Pokémon keeps turning, whether you're counting stats or simply floating. Slowly, the water around you brightens, the outlines below fading, as if the ruins are sinking away instead of you rising. The pull of the currents eases, and you can almost feel the surface above your head, where waves meet sky, and the cries of distant Wingull fray the edges of the silence. Up there, Unova's roots and forests are still waiting, with their own small surprises, shifting seasons that repaint the grass and leaves, hidden paths that twist behind trees, tiny, frustrating, and beloved water types splashing in shallow ponds. When you're ready, we'll follow those paths again. But for now, you can stay right here between seabed and sky, carried gently by a region that has more secrets than battles and more quiet moments than anyone ever really counts. And in that quiet, between seabed and sky, Unova does something very gentle that many trainers never quite notice. It starts to sing to itself. Not the loud, triumphant themes of a heated battle, but soft patterns and shifting melodies that change as calmly as the weather, as if the whole region were breathing in time with you. Black and White's music is a little different from what came before, because what makes Unova so interesting is how alive its soundscape feels. For every fixed, looping root theme in older games, there is a track here that bends with the season, or glows a little warmer at night, or quietly rearranges itself when you stop to talk to a stranger. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is the story of background music that refuses to stay completely still. On certain routes, the game even treats sound like a hidden puzzle. You walk onto Route 10 and hear a steady, reassuring melody. And yet, when you step near a worker or a musician, an extra guitar line or a soft drum pattern fades in, as if that one NPC has been carrying an instrument the whole time. Route 5, Route 6, places like Drift Vale Drawbridge and the Two Blind Bridge. Stand in just the right spot, listen long enough, and the track blossoms. Layers folding over each other so slowly, you might miss them if you rush from one battle to the next. Seasonal roots deepen that feeling. Osiris City's music is playful and light when the snow is fresh, meshed with little percussive taps that sound almost like weak water-type Pokemon splashing helplessly in puddles. But in another season, the same place feels more subdued. The rhythm softened, like the town has gone indoors to rest. Undella Town, too, changes clothes with the calendar. In summer, it's airy and bright, a seaside afternoon, while in other months it becomes something more wistful, almost lonely, like a resort waiting for trainers who never arrive. Around the edges of those melodies, the game lets ambient sounds do quiet work. Waves roll and retreat along Undella's shore. Wind threads itself through Route 7's high walkways. Distant machinery hums in places like Chargestone Cave and the bridges. All of it mixed just low enough that it never becomes frustrating, never drowns the music, only fills in the empty spaces where words and battles would feel too loud. If you settle in, close your eyes, and listen to these tracks outside the game, they start to feel like a playlist, built for late-night study or slow, drifting sleep. Placed together, these gentle root themes, their seasonal cousins, and the faint sounds of water and wind evolve into something almost therapeutic. A reminder that not every part of Pokemon needs power or spectacle to matter. And somewhere in that calm, as Unova hums softly to itself, the region is already preparing another kind of sound entirely, one that waits just beyond the next gate, where the music stops being background and starts to tell the story out loud. So after the music has told its story, and the waves and wind have faded into a kind of gentle hush, Unova offers something stranger and softer still. A place where battles are rehearsed, retaken, and quietly edited until they fit a script. PokeStar Studios sits there on the shoreline like a dream of cinema, inviting trainers to settle in, close your eyes, and imagine what a Pokemon battle looks like when it knows it's being watched. The process always begins the same way, not with a roar of power, but with a clipboard. You walk up to the counter, choose a script, and suddenly this familiar system of turns and moves becomes a little stage play, complete with conditions and cues. Instead of simply trying to win the battle, you are asked to feint at the right time, to endure with low HP, or to use a specific move on a specific turn, as if your poor bewildered creature has just been handed a line in a language it doesn't quite understand. What makes PokeStar so interesting is how those scripts twist the world you already know into something knowingly artificial. There is a hulking metal monster in Bryson Man's films that feels like a gentle parody of classic kaiju. There are superhero send-ups where your Pokemon poses dramatically between attacks, and there are stories that echo in-universe legends, turning myths into matinee performances. For every serious tale of truth and ideals that Unova tells outside, there is a cardboard and spotlight imitation inside, where the same kinds of creatures stumble through retakes under the studio lamps. And yet, this is not a story of glory or victory. In many of these movies, the best ending comes not from overwhelming the opponent, but from following the script so faithfully that you might have to lose on purpose, or spam a weak move that would normally feel helpless and frustrating to use. A critical hit at the wrong moment can actually ruin the scene, and a perfectly timed protect or status move can be treated like the emotional climax, as if the battle system itself is learning to act. Placed together, these scripted duels and alternate endings start to feel quietly meta, a soft commentary on a series usually about wandering wherever you like and battling however you choose. NPCs will stop to mention your films, posters bloom along the studio corridors, and this little corner of Unova remembers what you did, even if the rest of the region moves on. Imagine them drifting in the current. Those posters and lines of dialogue, small ripples that never quite disappear. It fits in a hushed way with what Black 2 and White 2 are doing overall, revisiting an old story, then tilting it under a new light so you notice different details. Unova evolves without restarting, and PokéStar reframes battles not as pure competition, but as scenes to be staged, rewritten, and watched. And just beyond the studio doors, the region is ready to show you what happens when the script ends and the unscripted world begins again. Out beyond those studio doors, Unova starts to bend its own rules in quieter ways, and if you settle in, close your eyes for a moment. You can almost feel the region breathing on its own schedule. Instead of a single, fixed overworld that waits politely for trainers to arrive, Black and White begin to move without you. The seasons turn, memories carry over from older save files, and even the idea of a Pokémon battle is gently pulled apart and rearranged on a movie set. Seasons are the slowest of these experiments, and what makes them so interesting is how unhurried they feel. Every real-world month, the game slips from spring to summer, from autumn into winter, and the same Route 4 that once baked under harsh sun can later sit under snow. Its music softened, its sand drifts reshaped into pale, quiet dunes. Some ledges in a Cirrus city freeze into walkable paths. Some items and weak little creatures appear only in certain months, and yet the main story never demands that you wait, never scolds you if you rush through and miss an entire cycle. For every trainer who plans around Deerling's forms, there is another who barrels past, never noticing that the world was patiently changing under their feet. Memory Link, hiding in the sequel's menus, tugs in the opposite direction, not forward through weather, but backward through time. By connecting Black or White with Black 2 or White 2, you quietly import old choices, old battles, and even the faint outline of old friendships, so that characters like Sharon and Bianca don't just reappear as upgraded gym leaders, but as people who remember you. Little flashbacks unlock. Former Team Plasma members speak differently, and the story of truth versus ideals stops being a clean reset and becomes a slightly messy continuation instead. It is easy, almost frustratingly easy, to ignore this feature, and yet, placed together, these small scenes turn Unova into a place that evolves without needing every adventure to start from zero. Then there is PokéStar Studios again, hovering at the edge of the map like a joke that became canon. Inside, battles are scripted, damage ranges are puzzles, and a weak water type can be asked to faint on cue because the director thinks it will test better with audiences. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of hitting your marks, following the script, and then watching the playback, as if the fight were never about power at all, taken as a loose mini-cluster. Seasons, Memory Link, and PokéStar Studios show Unova treating time, memory, and performance as central parts of the journey, rather than optional distractions. They reward trainers who move slowly, who notice when the snow has melted, or when a line of dialogue has changed, who are willing to see a battle as something other than a blunt contest of strength. And if the world is allowed to be that flexible, then it's no surprise that some of Unova's Pokémon designs and battle mechanics quietly bend expectations too, from awkward, lopsided creatures that look almost helpless in motion, to strange new abilities and forms that evolve the moment you think you understand the rules. Imagine them drifting in the current just ahead of us. Because next, we'll let those odd designs and offbeat systems float to the surface one by one. Those odd shapes drifting just beneath the surface aren't only about how they look. They're about how they fight, or sometimes, how they stubbornly refuse to fight the way trainers expect. In Unova, even the invisible details of a battle start to feel like quiet character studies, as if the game is asking you to settle in, close your eyes, and notice how a single line of text on a status screen can completely change the rhythm of a fight. What makes Gen V so interesting is how many of its new abilities sound small on paper, yet tilt an entire playstyle when they actually appear in battle. Moxie, for example, is such a simple idea. Knock out a foe, and your attack rises. On a terrifying creature like Gyarados or Crocodile, it turns each fainted opponent into fuel, encouraging trainers to snowball, to chase momentum instead of swapping out the moment things look risky. For every weak, sputtering water type that barely dents an opponent, there is a Moxie Sweeper, quietly waiting for that first knockout, so it can stop feeling helpless and start feeling inevitable. Then there is Regenerator, which almost feels like it was designed for tired, overworked support Pokemon who just want a break. Switch out, and you heal a third of your health. That's it. No sparkle, no fanfare, just a gentle reset. On creatures like Slowbro or Amoonguss, it invites a slow, rotating style of battle, where you pivot in and out, soak a hit, and drift back to safety, instead of clinging on in a frustrating doomed stand. Multiscale goes in the opposite direction. A Dragonite at full health simply takes less damage. Like the first blow, lands through a cushion of air, rewarding careful protection and steady recovery. Placed together, these quiet abilities feel like they were tuned with high-level play in mind. Little gears meant for tournaments and spreadsheets, and yet, they still appear in the main story as if nothing special is happening. A random trainer's Dragonite might casually shrug off a hit with Multiscale. A wild Slowpoke in a later game might regenerate off-screen. And most players will never know that a competitive engine is humming under that sleepy surface. Moves shift the tone too. Scald, especially, is almost rude in how efficient it is. A solid water attack with a generous chance to burn, letting bulky, otherwise unimpressive water types threaten physical attackers just by existing. Imagine them drifting in the current, these round, slow creatures that once felt so weak, suddenly able to cripple a powerful foe with one lucky splash of boiling water. This is not a story of glory or victory, but of awkward Pokemon like Alomomola, or Frillish finding strange usefulness as walls, clerics, and status spreaders, turning what looked like forgettable designs into quiet specialists. And yet, some of the most overlooked Unova Pokemon only become interesting because of these tools, evolving in purpose if not in form, gaining roles that the story never points out loud. It's a reminder that hidden potential isn't just about dramatic evolutions. Sometimes it's a single move, a single ability, tucked away on a weak creature you almost boxed forever. If the visible battles can hide this much depth, you might wonder what else Unova is keeping out of sight. Because beyond the credits, in post-game routes, strange facilities, and optional ruins, there are secrets waiting that change how the whole region feels once you finally find them. So when the credits finally roll in black and white, it can feel like the end of a long, careful climb. But Unova is only just starting to loosen its collar a little. For every tense main story battle against N or Ghetsis, there is a quiet route, a forgotten cave, or a strange facility that only opens once the world decides you've proven yourself enough to wander without supervision. The first thing that happens is simple but powerful. The map itself changes. Those eastern routes, the ones that sat on the edge of the screen like a secret, unfold into places like Route 11 and 12, to the village bridge, and eventually, the giant chasm. What makes Unova so interesting is how it stops pretending to be sealed off. Suddenly, trainers run into Pokémon from older generations, as if the region has taken a deep breath and let the wider world's creatures drift in at last. After an entire story built around isolation and newness, seeing a wild Pelipper or a quiet Staryu bobbing in the water feels almost like meeting old friends who took the long way around. And these post-game spaces are not loud. The music softens, the trainers are fewer but stronger, and the stakes feel lower even as the levels climb higher. The giant chasm in particular has that sleepy end-of-night feeling. Snow falling, strange echoes, and powerful Pokémon lurking in the dark, waiting for the kind of trainer who stays up too late chasing secrets. Settle in, close your eyes, and you can almost hear the crunch of snow underfoot, the gentle splash of some weak little water type hiding in a pond it really shouldn't share with Kyurem. There's a quiet poetry in how former milestones become repeat performances. Gym leaders, who once blocked your progress, now offer rematches. Their teams stronger, their strategies sharper, their patience for your helpless early game mistakes entirely gone. Important characters return as optional opponents, turning what used to be scripted climaxes into recurring tests of strength and memory. This is not a story of glory or victory anymore. It's a story of checking in, seeing how everyone has grown, and maybe getting wiped out by a familiar face who no longer pulls their punches. And yet, Unova doesn't stop there. Black 2 and White 2 take that idea of a second journey and make it literal, jumping 2 years ahead and treating the whole region like a place that evolves alongside its Pokémon. New gym leaders step in, old ones move on, and post-game content blossoms into things like the Pokémon World Tournament, where champions and gym leaders from Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, and Unova gather in one oddly small building. Imagine them drifting in the current, powerful names reduced to sprites in a bracket, waiting politely for you to challenge them. It could have been overwhelming, but instead it feels strangely calm. For every high-stakes championship match, there is a quiet walk through a changed Route 4, a soft moment in Undella Bay, or a rematch you take just to see an old team again. Placed together, these post-game threads turn Unova into somewhere you revisit when you need something familiar and gentle. A region that always has one more trainer, one more hidden creature, one more late-night battle waiting just off the main road, leading softly into the next set of secrets this world is still hiding. And just when you think Unova has finished whispering its quiet little secrets, the region opens a door that doesn't lead to a new route or a hidden cave, but to the past itself. Settle in, close your eyes for a moment, and picture a simple building by the water in Driftvale City. Unassuming on the outside, but inside, every journey you've ever taken is waiting in a single room. This is the Pokémon World Tournament, a place where weak early game memories and towering legends are invited to stand side by side, where gym leaders and champions from Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, and Unova gather like old co-workers at a reunion that somehow turned into a battle facility. For every lonely rival you left behind on some distant route, there is blue smirking across the field again. For every silent mountaintop, there is red, still wordless, still staring, still terrifying. Cynthia is here with that familiar Garchomp, Steven, Lance, Misty, Brock, all folded into the same soft glow of the arena lights. What makes this place so interesting is how it quietly turns Unova into a crossroads of the entire series. Not with fireworks, but with details that feel almost gentle. Old battle themes return as remixed echoes, just a little sharper, a little slower, like hearing a song from childhood through a new set of speakers. Familiar faces have new dialogue, small comments about how the world has changed, how trainers have grown, how their own teams have shifted, and yet, the core of each creature they use is still there. Brock still leans on rock types, Misty still trusts the water, Red still lets that Pikachu stand at the front like a tiny, stubborn guardian. There is something quietly emotional about seeing these characters, rendered in the black and white style, as if the pixel memories of earlier regions have evolved into a cleaner, more defined form, but kept their hearts exactly the same. It feels a little like your old cartridges have been invited on a trip to Unova's present, and all those long nights of weak teams, helpless losses, and frustrating rematches are suddenly acknowledged with a nod and a smile. This is not a story of glory or victory, not really. It is a story of recognition. The tournament itself is surprisingly deep, offering single, double, triple, and rotation formats, difficulty that climbs from playful to punishing, and brackets that encourage you to refine teams, test odd strategies, and bring back creatures you thought you had outgrown. Placed together, these modes turn the building into a quiet, long-term project, something you return to in the same way you might revisit a favorite shoreline just to watch the water. For many trainers, the Pokémon World Tournament feels like a soft thank you note from the developers, a way of saying that all those journeys across regions were seen, remembered, and gently woven into Unova's fabric, leading us toward one more layer of this world's quiet connections, waiting just beyond the next screen. From that grand stage of familiar champions, the camera quietly tilts back down to the undergrowth, to the parts of Unova where nothing seems to be happening, until you really stop and look. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story of tiny gaps between trees, of narrow shadows along a cliff face, where the game almost whispers, "Slow down." Hidden grottos in Black 2 and White 2 are exactly that kind of whisper. Small, partially concealed spaces, tucked along roots, where special Pokémon and items can appear as if they've been waiting there all along. At first glance, they hardly look like anything at all, just a darker patch in the tree line, or a strangely inviting hollow in the rock. But what makes X so interesting is how deliberately quiet they are. How easy they are to walk past if you're sprinting from one battle to the next. For every loud, scripted cutscene, there is this gentle, optional corner. You start to learn the language of them. The way a cluster of trees forms a narrow arch. The way a cliff edge leaves a little crescent of shadow that doesn't quite match the rest of the route. And suddenly, you're nudging your character against the border, just to see if the screen will fade. Trainers who usually rush forward now find themselves scanning the edges, tracing the outlines of forests and riverbanks, because the reward is not just a rare creature, but that soft click of recognition when the entrance finally appears. Settle in, close your eyes, and you can almost picture yourself walking those same paths in real life, noticing the one gap in the hedgerow you somehow missed yesterday. Inside, the grottos hold more than just items. They hold Pokémon that feel slightly out of place, like they've slipped in from another layer of Unova. Many of them can appear with their hidden abilities, subtle twists that don't shout for attention but quietly change how a battle might unfold. A weak little Watchog, suddenly carrying Analytic, a timid Fungus with Regenerator, a harmless-looking Minccino that secretly has skill link and turns those multi-hit moves into something far less helpless than they appear at first glance. The creatures themselves aren't legendary. They're not even especially imposing. And yet, that's what makes the discovery feel so personal. Because the grottos repopulate over time, they turn familiar routes into something like favorite walking trails you keep returning to, checking the same hollow tree after a few in-game hours, wondering if something new has moved in. Placed together, these small routines start to feel like a quiet relationship with the landscape, a rhythm of leaving and coming back, of patience rewarded instead of power demanded. It's a gentle kind of design, the opposite of frustrating, where the world breathes on its own schedule and you simply choose to visit. Hidden grottos fit perfectly into Black and White's wider tapestry of overlooked details and quiet secrets. Another reminder that Unova is less about spectacle and more about what you notice when you're willing to slow your steps. Imagine them drifting in the current of your memory, alongside those weak water roots and half-forgotten docks. Not the stars of any team, but soft, persistent presences that make the region feel alive. And just when you think you've seen every shadow and every hollow, Unova has one more way of hiding something in plain sight. Not in the trees this time, but in the very shape of the land itself, because Unova doesn't just tuck things behind trees. It folds them into the seabed, the sand, and the stone. Like quiet thoughts it never quite says out loud. If you settle in, close your eyes, you can almost chart the region just by its hidden spaces. 3 different kinds of secrets waiting for trainers who wander a little off the main route. First, there is the Abyssal Ruins, that strange underwater maze off Undella Bay, where the water itself feels heavy, and every step is timed, counted, and quietly threatened by the surface above. This is not a story of glory or victory. There are no weak little mascots here, splashing in helpless circles. Just walls of unreadable symbols, relic crowns and plates and vases that never join you in battle, and a constant awareness that the oxygen will run out long before your curiosity does. What makes this place so interesting is how it asks for patience, for planning, for the kind of methodical mapping that feels almost old-fashioned, like taking notes by hand in a world that usually hands you a guide. Then, almost as a joke in miniature, you have hidden grottos, those tiny pockets in the trees and cliffs where the camera tilts, the light softens, and a single creature or item waits like a secret that has gotten a little lost. For every grand ruin full of lore, there is a small hollow containing a Minccino with a rare ability, a fungus pretending to be important, or some slightly frustrating item you didn't really need but feel oddly pleased to find anyway. These spots are repeatable, gentle, almost domestic. They reward observation more than power, noticing the slightly darker patch of leaves or the odd gap in the rock, and they turn everyday walking into a quiet little treasure hunt. Relic Castle sits between them, not in size, but in spirit. A sprawling ruin half swallowed by the desert, where Volcarona waits in its chamber, and the sand behaves like a mischievous weakling, dropping you through floors the moment you grow overconfident. Here the past feels heavier, tied to Unova's ancient kings, to the same myths that ripple out toward En, Reshiram, and Zekrom. And yet, most of its chambers are optional, side rooms of history you can leave untouched. Imagine them drifting in the current of the region's memory. These broken staircases and buried halls, quietly insisting that Unova existed long before your starter Pokemon took its first hit. Placed together, these three kinds of hidden space form a layered invitation. Think slowly, look closely, wonder about what came before. None of them are required to finish the story. You can rush from gym to gym, from plasma encounter to final battle, and never feel truly helpless for skipping a single relic or grotto. And yet, if you move at the video's own slow, meandering pace, they become the soft background noise of the journey. The reason Unova feels less like a straight line and more like a place you lived in for a while. Here's the quiet pattern. Interrupt. After sinking so deep into ruins and hollows, the most important thing might be to leave them, to climb back to the surface roads, to the bridges and city lights, and notice how much secret weight you're now carrying without realizing it. Because as we head into these closing stretches, it may be time to stop searching every shadow and instead reflect on what all these tucked-away corners have been whispering about Unova, and about the way we explore games when no one is rushing us to the end. So now, instead of diving into one more hidden basement or forgotten pool, the camera in your mind can climb all the way out of Unova's maze and just keep walking as the day lets go. The rush of tunnels and secret routes fades, and above you, the sky over Unova is turning that soft, familiar orange and pink, the kind that makes even the busiest region feel weak and sleepy around the edges. Out on the routes, the light stretches long shadows from every signpost and patch of grass. The same grass you've paced through for hours of battle and grinding, now looking more like a blanket than a threat. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture Route 1 slowing down. The wild Patrat and Lillipup almost too tired to jump out. The water along the shore reflecting that fading stripe of color, as if the whole region is exhaling at once. You pass through Nuvema Town first, its little cluster of quiet houses, resting at the edge of everything. The professor's lab windows, glowing just enough to suggest someone is still working late, being still thinking about how every Pokemon evolves, even the ones no one brings to tournaments. For every legendary creature soaring over the region, there is one small, unimpressive Frillish bobbing near the pier, looking a bit helpless and a bit silly, like it missed the memo about being threatening. Accumula Town comes next, its gentle hills and simple stairways softened by the evening. The plaza where trainers once listened to N speak about truth and ideals is almost empty now. Just the faint hum of the speakers and the sound of your own footsteps. And yet, the same theme that carried through Reshiram and Zekrom, through Black City and White Forest, feels quieter here, like it's learned to whisper instead of argue. Further on, the bridge into Castelia stretches across the water like a slow steel ribbon, the sunset catching on every cable. Cars slide by in miniature, and the ocean below holds all those disappointing water types that never quite found their power, just drifting. Imagine them drifting in the current, a lonely basculin that never got invited to the main team, a ducklet that stayed a ducklet because you forgot to train it, a feeble Timpole hopping along the shallows, more background noise than battle partner. As you step into Castelia itself, the skyscrapers don't feel overwhelming anymore. They feel like tall, sleepy guardians watching over back alleys and docks where weak, half-forgotten Pokemon wait in the shadows of containers and ferries. This is not a story of glory or victory tonight, just a quiet walk past places that once felt urgent and now feel like memories. By the time you imagine yourself looping back toward Nimbasa's dimmed lights or the dark outline of Victory Road in the distance, the in-game music in your mind has shifted too, from bright daytime tunes to those calmer, more subdued night themes. Placed together, these softened melodies and fading colors turn the whole region into a lullaby. Each fact and story we've explored sinking down like a stone into a deep, still lake. You can picture your whole team walking beside you on this last stretch. Not just the strong ones, but the underused, the frustrating, the ones that never got the right moves or held the right item. A soggy Panpour that never evolved, a Marill that stayed oddly underleveled, a Jellicent that mostly sat in the PC box, all padding along at your side as if they had been essential all along, each weak creature filling a small, important space in the line. As night finally settles over Unova, the orange and pink drained into a deep blue. The facts and secrets and tiny disappointments we've gathered can settle too. They sink beneath the surface of your thoughts until they're just part of the background hum of memory, like the soft surf at Undella Bay. And as we turn toward our final recap, you can keep walking that dusk-lit path in your mind, letting the region grow darker and quieter, step by step, until there's nothing left to do but listen. So as that surf at Undella keeps rolling in, soft and steady, we can start to see the whole region like a tapestry laid out in the dark, threads of truth and ideals crossing and knotting together. Settle in, close your eyes, and you can almost feel how every root, every weak little creature, every towering legend is tugging on one side or the other, on what is and what could be. At the center, of course, are Reshiram and Zekrom, those great dragons that look so far removed from the helpless things splashing in the water. And yet, they're just another way to argue about reality. Reshiram burns for truth, for the world as it actually stands, even when it's uncomfortable. Zekrom crackles with ideals, with the dream of a better future that might never quite match the facts. Placed together, these two aren't just version mascots. They're a quiet reminder that trainers are always choosing between accepting the limits of a weak team and believing it can evolve into something stronger. N and the player walk that same tightrope. He begins with a simple, almost childlike ideal. Pokemon should be freed from trainers, especially from frustrating battles and unfair power gaps. The player, meanwhile, trudges through tall grass and city streets, seeing the messy truth of bonds, of weak partners that grow, of strong partners that still fail. For every clear, confident speech N gives, there is the silent answer of your journey, where reality keeps complicating his dream. Even the land itself argues. In one version, Black City rises as a stark, metallic place of battles and profit. In the other, White Forest stretches out, green and quiet, full of gentle Pokemon that barely threaten anyone. What makes this so interesting is that neither is really right or wrong. One is the truth of technology and ambition. The other is the ideal of untouched nature. Unova never tells you which future to choose. It just lets you walk through both. That works because Unova is already distant, a region across the ocean, shaped by New York's skyline and subways instead of old Japanese towns. Skyscrapers, highways, and piers press right up against reeds, rivers, and those faint little water types that seem too weak for such a big city. Some look almost out of place, like they wandered in from a quieter game and got stuck in Castilia's harbor. Then time starts to move. Seasons slide past, snow piling in Osiris, leaves drifting over Route 4. Even the music changing as months roll on. Black 2 and White 2 repaint whole cities. Route 4's half-built desert becomes a different kind of compromise, and Memory Link lets you peer backward, seeing how characters and ideals have shifted over 2 slow years. Team Plasma's bold revolution unravels into splintered factions. its good intentions warped by power, then quietly reconsidered by those who survived. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story where understanding arrives late, awkward, and incomplete. Like an underleveled Pokemon finally learning a move it always needed. And underneath it all, Unova becomes a kind of coming-of-age tale. You start with sharp edges and simple labels. This is good, that is bad, this Pokemon is strong, that one is weak. And the longer you walk, the more those lines blur. Imagine them drifting in the current. Truths, ideals, victories, disappointments, all slowly mixing until you can't quite tell where one ends and the other begins. The region doesn't shout its answer. It just waits, patiently, for you to notice what's been changing while you weren't looking. Because there is one last thread we haven't tugged on yet. One more quiet question hiding in the dark. And once you see it, the whole tapestry of Unova feels just a little different. So from that last quiet question, the camera pulls back a little, and Unova itself comes into focus again. Not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a place you've slowly walked through. Castilia's harbor is still there in the background. Those long piers and cargo ships sitting in the water like sleepy steel types. The gentle creak of ropes and the distant call of Wingull, turning a simple port into something that feels oddly lived in. As if the city would keep breathing, whether trainers showed up to battle or not. Far away, Undella Town keeps doing its own small magic trick. The music changing with the seasons so softly that you might forget when it first shifted. The bright, almost vacation-like theme of summer slowly giving way to something more subdued, as if the town itself is getting tired. Relic Castle slumps under the desert, a weak, half-buried monument to a kingdom that lost its power a long time ago, while deep below the sea, the abyssal ruins wait. Walls covered in messages you can't quite read, like a letter from another generation of Pokemon players that never got mailed. In a region like that, the people can't help but feel a little more real as well. N wanders through Unova like a gentle creature who accidentally rolled high on philosophy instead of special attack, standing on Ferris wheels and castle balconies, asking questions that most villains are too busy monologuing to consider. The gym leaders don't just stand in their arenas either. They show up in crowds and story moments, in those little scenes that make them seem less like battle dispensers and more like slightly eccentric locals who happen to own a lot of Pokemon. Even the recurring NPCs, the subway bosses with their matching poses, the strange rich tourists in Undella, the weak little collectors begging to see one more creature for their Pokedex. All of them help sell the idea that, for every legendary hero, there is someone just living here, going to work, riding the battle subway because it's fun and a little frustrating, not because the fate of the world depends on it. And then there are the systems quietly ticking away underneath. What makes Unova so interesting is how it resets the stage. An all-new regional Pokedex at first. No old faces to lean on. New moves and abilities slipped into the pool so that even veteran trainers had to feel a bit helpless again, fumbling through unfamiliar matchups. Later, Pokestar Studios invites you to step off the usual path and act out battles as if they were scenes, while the Pokemon World Tournament gathers gym leaders and champions from other regions, turning nostalgia into a structured challenge rather than just a memory. Hidden grottos sit off to the side of routes, tiny pockets where rare abilities and odd encounters wait for anyone patient enough to check the same tree again and again. Post-game paths open, optional facilities, and late-game areas make it clear that this is not a story of glory or victory that ends when the credits roll. Instead, Unova keeps going, like water running quietly under a bridge, always offering one more opponent, one more strange building, One more weak little side quest that somehow matters because you chose to see it. Pattern interrupt, just for a moment. If you don't remember every fact, every route name, every buried ruin, that's perfectly fine. Settle in, close your eyes, and let the details blur together. Place together, these locations, people, and mechanics aren't a checklist to complete, but a feeling to sink into, the sense that you really did wander through a carefully crafted world, and that somewhere in the dark, Unova is still there, waiting for the next small ripple to disturb its surface. So when the camera finally pulls back from those dark corners and quiet basements, it drifts, almost without you noticing, back over the water again, to the weak ones we forgot. For every legendary dragon circling above Unova, there is a basculin bumping its head against a rock, an unimpressive blue and red creature that most trainers only remember as the thing you run from on Route 1's river, rather than a partner they would ever bring into a serious battle. Unova's currents are full of these small, frustrating presences, the ones that nibble at your line just when you were hoping for something rare, the ones that make you sigh and mash the run button, and yet. What makes Basculin so interesting is how perfectly it matches those overlooked design details hiding everywhere in black and white. There are unused items buried in the data, NPCs who only speak once and never matter again, hidden rooms and half-seen buildings in Castelia that you can walk past for years without ever opening the door. Basculin is that feeling, but with fins. You can see it in the way the region treats its water routes. They are there, but they are not grand voyages. They are short crossings, quiet ponds, a ferry line in Castelia Harbor, where a lone basculin might be splashing under the pier, while trainers rush toward the battle company instead. For every dramatic encounter with N on a castle rooftop, there is a forgotten fisherman on Route 17, sending out a line of weak water-type Pokemon that will never evolve into anything special, existing mostly as a gentle reminder that not every team has to be optimized for power. Placed together, these small choices and small creatures form a kind of soft background music for Unova. The optional battle modes, the lingering Entralink features, the seasonal changes that slightly shift which water types appear on a rainy spring night in Osiris. All of them feel a bit like Basculin, Ducklet, or even a lonely Frillish drifting just out of sight. Not essential to the story, not impressive in a fight, but part of the texture that makes the region feel like a place instead of a checklist. No, this is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of things that were allowed to be minor. So settle in, close your eyes, and think about those weak water types you fled from without a second thought. The ones that never got nicknames, never saw the Elite Four, never proved that they could be more than helpless filler. They do not complain. They do not demand a buff or a new evolution. Imagine them drifting in the current around Undella Bay and the P2 laboratory, weaving between abandoned ships and unused code, perfectly content to be scenery rather than stars, as the rest of Unova continues on above them, chasing ideals, truths, and sometimes just a slightly stronger fish. Down there, in that quiet water around Undella Bay, the weak little creatures keep circling, and up here on the shoreline, something softer settles in. If you like, you can settle in, close your eyes, and just let a different kind of question drift past. The sort that doesn't demand an answer. The sort that simply shares the space with the sound of the waves and the low hum of a distant battle theme. For every towering Kyogre or polished Milotic that steals the spotlight, there is some underappreciated Unova water type that never quite escaped the background, and yet might have quietly earned a place in your memory. Maybe it's Basculin, forever the stand-in, splashing angrily in every river, frustrating trainers who only wanted something rare. Maybe it's Alamomola, a giant pink heart that looks like it should evolve from Luvdisk and then stubbornly refuses to, a creature that feels like a half-finished thought. Is there one weak or overlooked Unova Pokemon like that, water type or otherwise, that you feel oddly attached to, even if you know it would fold in a serious battle almost instantly? What makes Unova so interesting is how even its land reflects that same split between strength and gentleness, between ideals and truth. Somewhere out there, the place you know as White Forest is breathing quietly, filled with trees, wild Pokemon, and a kind of digital wilderness that feels almost fragile. In another version, the same coordinates become Black City, all harsh lines and steel, trainers waiting to test your power under neon lights. You don't have to decide which one you prefer. You can just let the image of both float side by side, nature and circuitry placed together. These opposite answers to the same question about what a city should be. If there were ever a Pokemon Black and White 3, imagine them drifting in the current-like ideas, half-formed but comforting. Maybe N walks the new routes in bare feet, listening to the cries of weak Pokemon that other trainers ignore, helping a helpless Basculin find a quieter pool. Maybe Castilia's docks stretch further, with little boats where disappointed Remoraid and Ducklet wait for someone to notice them. Maybe Route 4's desert gives way to a rebuilt town, where old sand pits hide tiny, forgotten creatures that never got a new evolution, but still matter to someone. These questions do not need to be spoken. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a slow tide of what-ifs and almosts, the kind that can simply rest in the back of your mind while you breathe and listen and drift. If, later on, when you wake or when you feel ready, you decide to share which weak favorite you cherish, or which version of Unova feels like home, there is a quiet little community out there that understands these long, wandering journeys through game worlds and the comfort of caring about the most forgettable fish. Because just beyond this shoreline of thoughts, Unova is still hiding one more kind of weakness, and it does not swim at all. Does not swim at all. Here, the weak thing is not a creature, but attention itself, wandering in and out like the tide. And this is where the Sleepy Unova archive quietly opens its doors. If you find yourself enjoying this long, slow drift through facts and half-forgotten details, the kind of gentle Pokemon talk that you can leave on while you study, relax, or settle in, close your eyes. You are always welcome to subscribe and come back whenever you like. There is no rush, no pressure, just a small light in the corner of your screen that says, "This is a place for soft voices and unhurried game worlds." For every loud, fast channel that races through tier lists and optimal battle teams, there is another path that moves at walking speed, stopping to notice the shape of a pier or the pattern on a weak water type's tail. What makes Unova so interesting is that its design stretches far beyond its battles, from Castelia City's crowded docks to the quiet edge of Undella Bay. And this channel is trying to be an ongoing archive of those softer stories, a shelf of sleepy game lore you can pull down whenever the real world feels a little too sharp. Imagine them drifting in the current. Not just the Pokemon, but the facts themselves, bumping gently against each other in the background while you do something else. If you enjoy that feeling, you might like knowing that future journeys will wander beyond Unova's borders, with the same calm pacing, sometimes following a single water type across regions, sometimes lingering on ghost types and their strange, almost helpless flavor text, sometimes devoting an entire night to one city or one character who never quite got their moment. Black and White's truth versus ideals. Black 2 and White 2's quiet time skip. Even the way Route 4 changes between versions, all of these are part of a much larger, slower conversation we can keep returning to, like visiting Nimbasa's lights after the rain. And yet, there is one small favor for those who are still awake enough to move a finger. Down in the comments, if you feel like it, you can whisper the name of your favorite weak or overlooked Unova Pokemon, the one that never wins a battle, but somehow still lives rent-free in your memory. Maybe it is Basculin, splashing around with more forms than real power, or Ducklet, flapping along like it forgot it ever evolves at all. Placed together, these little confessions will become a list of gentle failures and secret favorites, and in future episodes, some of those names will quietly float back up, mentioned in passing like old friends. If you are already drifting off, you do not need to do anything. This is not a story of glory or victory, and the video has already done its job if your thoughts are moving more slowly than they were before. You can always return another night, when the seasons in Unova have turned again, and let another round of soft, useless, wonderful trivia keep you company while you fall asleep. So now, as those soft, useless, wonderful bits of trivia start to blur at the edges, let Unova itself begin to drift away a little, as if you were slowly rising above the map on the bottom screen. The routes and rivers that once filled the whole world of your adventure become thin silver lines of water, and the cities that felt enormous in the moment of battle turn into small, glowing shapes resting gently in the dark. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture Castelia City first, that dense vertical maze that once tried so hard to impress you with its skyscrapers and alleys. From up here, the office blocks and docks are just a soft cluster of lights, no longer loud or overwhelming, just a quiet constellation where weak little water Pokemon still splash uselessly by the piers, ignored by trainers hurrying home. What makes Unova so interesting is how even this New York-inspired giant can be reduced to a tiny, comforting sparkle when you are far enough away. Further along the coast, Undella Town's shoreline shrinks to a faint shimmer, like someone spilled a line of moonlight along the edge of the region and forgot to clean it up. Those waves that once hid frustrating, forgettable creatures, the ones that appeared over and over, with no real power to offer in battle, are now only a slow, silver breathing at the edge of your vision. For every legendary Stormbringer, there is a little thing that only knows how to splash and flop. And from this height, imagine them drifting in the current, part of the same soft pattern of motion and sound. Turn your attention inland, where Nimbasa's amusement park, so bright and noisy when you first walked through it, has become a distant ring of color. The Ferris wheel, the stadiums, the neon signs that once demanded your attention are reduced to tiny points of comfort, like the standby light on a sleeping console. They are not calling you into another match, another ride, another test of strength. They are simply there, a reminder that the world of Pokemon can rest too. You do not need to hold on to the names now, or the exact routes, or which version had Black City and which one offered White Forest. Let the facts about sequels and seasons, about truth and ideals, about who evolves into what and when, all soften into a gentle background hum. Placed together, these details can be a blur without losing their warmth. Unova will still be there when you want it again, whether tucked into an old cartridge, hidden inside an emulator window, or sitting quietly in the back of your mind, waiting for you to wake up. This is not a story of glory or victory anymore. It is just a place you once visited, growing smaller and calmer as you drift upward and away, me getting ready for the final comfortable silence that comes next. So as that silence settles in, the camera doesn't rush away. It lingers just a little on the soft outline of Unova, as if the region itself is watching you go and doesn't mind at all whether you were here for every fact, every weak little creature, and every strange mechanic, or whether you slipped in and out, catching only fragments between blinks, whether you stayed sharp and awake, or let the words blur and bend as you drifted. Thank you for spending this quiet stretch of night in Unova. For some trainers, black and white are a sharp memory of release days and school bags, the first steps through Castalia's crowded streets, and the first time they realized a main region could be modeled on New York instead of another corner of Japan. For others, they are just a gentle background, a cartridge left in a handheld on a bedside table, humming with old saves and half-finished teams. For every player chasing the perfect battle in the Pokemon World Tournament, there is someone who only remembers the weak early game Lillipup, or a helpless Basculin encounter, frustrating and forgettable, and yet somehow comforting in its predictability. What makes Unova so interesting is how it can hold all of that at once. Truth and ideals, sequels and first runs, knowing fierce competitive sets and Pokemon that never once saw the inside of a serious team. Some people think of seasons changing on Route 4. Others think of Ends Castle rising behind the league. And others still just remember the way Undella Town's music slows down in winter. Like the whole shoreline is telling you to settle in, close your eyes, and let the waves do the talking for a while. This is not a story of glory or victory anymore. It is just a loop you can step into whenever the room feels too still, or the thoughts feel a bit too loud. You are always welcome to come back to this video, or another quiet wander through the weak water-type Pokemon and fading regions, and let them play in the corner of the night while you study, or rest, or stare at the ceiling, and imagine them drifting in the current, placed together, these tiny facts and soft melodies forming something almost like company. There is no urgency waiting for you at the edge of Unova, only a simple wish. If you are about to sleep, may it be deep and unremarkable. If you are going back to studying or working, may it feel just a little lighter. If you are moving on to something else, may it be gentle on your mind. Out past Undella, the water darkens, and the waves lose their white edges, rolling in as slow, regular lines that brush the sand and retreat again without a sound. The last lights of the villas dim, the screen follows, and the region folds itself into the dark, until there is only the soft idea of water, the faint memory of a route theme, and then, finally, nothing at all. Out past Undella, the water darkens, and the waves lose their white edges, rolling in as slow, regular lines that brush the sand and retreat again without a sound. The last lights of the villas dim, the screen follows, and the region folds itself into the dark, until there is only the soft idea of water, the faint memory of a route theme, and then, finally, nothing at all. If your eyes are still half open here, you can settle in, close your eyes, and let Unova fade just a little further, because there are still so many other places, other weak little creatures and quiet roots, waiting somewhere off to the side of tonight's story. This is not a story of glory or victory anymore, just a reminder that the Pokemon world is wide, and that even when one region slips into silence, yes, others are resting just beyond the edge of the map, patient and unbothered by how long trainers take to visit them. There are ghostly corners, for instance, where even the weakest ghost types drift around like half-forgotten thoughts. A Shuppet that barely dents anything in battle. Or a Shedinja that feels almost helpless the moment a stray breeze of the wrong move touches it. For every terrifying Gengar, there is some sad, transparent thing that spends more time fainting than frightening. And yet, what makes them so interesting is how they still manage to haunt item descriptions, back rooms, and empty attics, more atmosphere than actual power. On another night, the mind could wander to Johto instead, to its myths about towers and bells and sleeping Pokémon that almost never appear on a normal playthrough. The way its roots fold softly around lakes and old ruins. Placed together, these half-remembered legends and frustratingly vague NPC stories could fill an entire hour on their own. A different sort of lullaby, less about damage and more about the quiet weight of old tales that never quite resolve. Or perhaps, some evening when the air feels warmer, there could be a slow walk along Hoenn's long routes and seas, past weak Wingull that always seem to show up when trainers are looking for something rarer, past Magikarp that still pretend they might be special this time. Imagine them drifting in the current. All those ordinary water-type Pokémon that never get used once the team evolves into something stronger, bobbing at the edge of the screen, like they are perfectly content to be background noise forever. There is no rush for any of these journeys. They can wait through many nights, many moods, many stretches of quiet time, where the room is dark and the only sound is whatever music your memory decides to play. If you are somehow still awake, you might let your thoughts slide toward your own favorite region, or that one team you trained too far, the one with a weak link you kept anyway, and let those small, private memories act as a personal lullaby, looping softly until they blur. For every new game, there is an older file. For every bright, busy screen, there is this darker, quieter version that lives only in the mind. Game worlds, like dreams, do not really end. They simply wait. Behind a menu, behind closed eyes, always there to return to, even when the screen is dark and the room is still, and there is nothing left to hear at all.